Mhm.
All right, good morning out there. For you people in the future, it is June 22nd, 8:45 in the AM on the Eastern Standard Time. And we're back. I think it's been what, 2 weeks, something like that. We did a part one of comic books that get to the heart of the matter, Gore. Is that
I
what we
think
did?
so. I think it's
Yeah.
been a few weeks, Tim.
Yeah. And these are the comics that water are touching or emotional, or how would you
Yeah,
describe it?
yeah.
Yeah.
Like the title says, it gets to the heart of the matter, it gets to the heart of who we are, and
Mhm.
it happens in the funnies as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think it's really important for comic books to have a bit of an emotional arc there, if you will, to make the characters feel rounded and to make it feel like it has stakes. And some of the stuff I'm going to show, it hits me a little bit on a personal level. Like it's not the story. I'm not going to be like one of these Woody Allen fans who are like, "That's my life up there." I remember my first Woody Allen movie that I went to. There was some dude walking around with his glasses, and so help me, I swear, I think he dressed up as Woody Allen, and I didn't catch it. But he was talking to a few people, and I overheard him say, "That's my life up there." And I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, I don't think you were involved in the Jade Scorpion murder. You know,
Do you remember the film, Tim? I like Woody Allen films.
oh, I love Woody Allen films.
Which one was it? The first one you saw? Do you remember?
Oh, the first one I saw was, oh God, you got me. It may have been Manhattan or the famous one with Diane Keaton before that. Annie
Annie
Hall or
Hall.
Manhattan,
Yeah,
Annie
Annie
Hall or
Hall, and then he
Manhattan.
did Manhattan.
Yep. And then Sleeper, that 70s aesthetic. I remember
Sleeper is
just
bizarre.
being
Yeah,
weirded out by what were supposed to be special effects of Woody Allen being painted white and stuff. Yeah, that one I remember just it made me uncomfortable because it was that 70s aesthetic that is so weird. Now I love it, So
no, it was Hannah and her sisters when that premiered. I mean, I knew the Woody Allen films, and but I never actually said I knew who he was, and
right.
on TV they would sometimes show the movies, but I had no interest. But it wasn't until I went to see Hannah and her sisters, and I was really enchanted by the film. I saw it multiple times, and it was then that I decided to give him a chance, and that's when I started to get the VHS, and definitely Manhattan and Annie Hall.
Yeah.
And then about a year or two after Crimes and Misdemeanors came out, I'm sorry, Crimes and Misdemeanors came out a few years after Hannah and her sisters, and I enjoyed that one as well. So I mean, I haven't seen all his work, but I do rewatch Hannah and her sisters quite a bit. I rewatched Manhattan and Annie Hall back to back, actually a few weeks ago, and uh, Manhattan is, I guess it's a toss up between Manhattan and Hannah and her sisters of my favorite movies by him, and the ones that I can just sit there and just watch from beginning to end.
Right.
Especially
Yeah.
Manhattan is visually is so beautiful to watch in black
Yeah.
and white, and the music by Gershwin is just absolutely wow. It's just I just never it gets old, that film for me. And
Right.
Hannah and her sister has a wonderful pacing, and and I keep thinking of Michael Caine, when he's trying to seduce his sister-in-law, Barbara Hershey, by giving her those poems, and it reminds me when I was young and I would do stuff like that, with women that read poems and such, and how actually that could work with some women. Others it doesn't work at all. And so yeah. Anyway, we're gonna stop talking Woody Allen, but yeah.
Well, I'm just gonna throw out there my favorite one, and if you watch it and be like, why is this Tim's favorite one? It's okay. But it's Deconstructing Harry. I wanted
Mhm.
to. There's
It's
a
a good
scene
film.
where he ends up, yeah, when he ends up in hell. That's when I fell in love with the movie. When he was in hell talking to the devil. So yeah, he had a bit of a renaissance going, in the 90s.
Excuse me.
Yeah, and Mighty Aphrodite, the Greek
Miras
tragedy.
Servina.
Yeah, yeah. All right, we have John here. So guys, we're going to dive into here, but be like
Good morning,
John.
everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks for
John
joining
was
us.
here around 8:15 before we got started. So be like John, subscribe, thumb it up, and make sure you hit the bell. Thank you, John.
Thank you for waiting, John. It's my fault we were late. Tim was actually wanting to go early, but I did have my act together, so it's my fault we're late.
I wasn't going to mention because I didn't want to curse myself here, jinx it. I'm not a superstitious man until it comes to this StreamYard stuff. Tyler reminds me of the Hulk Heart of the Atom. That was actually one of the books I was going to pull, but there was a lot to go over to get to that. I think I have a video up on that. Comic Collector, great to see you. And we have our European correspondent here. Afro's here. UK, everyone in the chat. Great to see him. He's always a couple hours ahead of us, if I believe right. So that's good. So Gore, we talked before. I think I have a few more books than you to pick from. So
yeah, if you want to get started, Tim, if you don't mind, you want to get started, that'd be great.
Well, I was going to suggest you hit it first here. If you want, whatever you want to do. Because one of mine, the first one I would show is going to be low hanging fruit, but I don't care. Everybody's going to see this one and be like, yeah, that does get to the heart of the matter. And then everybody might want to take a moment to take a breath, wipe a little tear from their eye. Okay. But basically it is my beat up James O'Barr, The Crow. Okay. This is the comic that, as much as I love comics, this is not a comic. It has Will Eisner influenced art in it. You can actually see James O'Barr go from, this Eisner want to be, highly inspired. I mean, this first splash page from like 1981 when he did this. Of course, let me find it here. Oh my goodness. It's been a while since I read this. Yeah, right here. This is directly out of one of Will Eisner's comics where he has the crow walking down the street. He's got like, I can't remember if I think it's Detroit, but it's there. This guy knew comics. And then we get to see him evolve into an artiste, where he has panels in here you can just study his art and stuff. That's one of the magic of this. This was written over years, drawn over years, and then once it started getting published, he sped it up a little bit. But it started out as something that was cathartic and emotional and wasn't going to be printed. Basically, James O'Barr was in foster homes, had a little bit of a hellish kind of upbringing. Around 18 or 19, he went into the real world, started detailing cars, met the love of his life. They were going to get married. And then for years, people always sort of wondered what really happened because they knew this was based on a tragedy. This was him working through a lot of things. And it turns out she was just walking down the sidewalk during the day, and a drunk driver rode up on the sidewalk and took out the love of his life. So he's been through things, right? So The Crow was based in the emotion and the anger and the mourning of that. I mean, this is what art is supposed to do, is you sort of write or you draw or you paint and you're trying to figure things out from within. You know what I'm saying? And get it out and work it out in your head. You know what I'm saying? It's Sunday morning. I'm on a second cup of coffee, and I could be a lot more eloquent than that. But there are scenes in here that he does when the Crow is remembering. Of course, in the Crow, there's a violent crime. The Crow is more or less an undead creature that he has pulled from Norse mythology with the Crow, bringing souls back for revenge, if that's a true mythology or not. I've never really looked it up and stuff, right? But he comes in there and he gives it subtext of religion and human condition, enjoying things. He has a little girl named Sherry whose mom has put her out on the steps in the middle of the night so she can screw one of the guys that he's after, for heroin and things like that. It tells her that on the lips of children, mother is the same as God, things like that, poetic stuff in there. And the whole time he's doing this, he's getting influenced by The Cure and New Order and Joy Division, right? That's what gives it the mood. He would play that music while it was coming out. He was into the alternative rock scene, if you will, back then. All right. So this is authentic. This guy would go to work on cars in a body shop, come home at night, turn up his music, do this, probably do his drugs, whatever. And I met James O'Barr. This is signed by him and stuff. And he was quite the character when I met him. The first time I met him, I couldn't do it. He kind of freaked me out a little bit. I got to meet him again about a year later. It's one thing to see James O'Barr, seen him sitting there kind of being, you can tell he's an ex-addict is what I'm trying to get at.
Mm.
And then I turned around and there was Jim Starlin. And I'm like, I can't do this. It was too much. I was, So for me, when I have to be in the mood to read The Crow, because this is one of the few things that will put me in a certain mood. The flashbacks of The Crow, of Eric remembering her in the tub, water splashing, her doing things for Christmas, in this shut down little home. He's a mechanic. It's you could tell. You can tell. Maybe I don't think that's the whole deal. It doesn't feel like he's taken memories and romanticized them.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like this is what happened, and then you immediately feel for him, and you end up missing her, even though you never knew her.
Yeah,
she seems like to be like, if anything, he may have romanticized what she was to him because of who she was. Like, I have found my true love. She's the light in my life. He's all dark haired and black, and she's all blonde. And when he draws her in pencil, there's very few outlines. She shines with the white of the page, things like that, the one, and then, like I said, as you get older, and as you get older and have some life experience, depending on, if you've had your heart broke or if you've lost and loved, I have no idea if this is showing up, you kind of feel his torment more and more with him, with the storytelling, when he's trying to forget and not remember things. If you've ever had your heart broke or if you've ever lost anyone, this is dead on. Little intimate things. They're naked in bed, but it's the touching of their feet. That's one of the things I'm married, and there's things that happen in life, especially when you're young. I've been married twice. I've had many girlfriends, but it's like the first time I didn't touch her feet, she was like, "Do you still love me?" The first time you did that rollover where you're not facing each other, you know what I mean? So yeah, that's where they were, and then by the time you realize that this is all about revenge and murder, and we know the girl, you're right there with them. You've caught yourself cheering for the death of human beings by Gollum, more or less. You know what I mean? Things like that. But it's very good. And then I was like, how do you end this? How do you end something like this, right? And he did the perfect ending after he gets everybody. All of a sudden, the season has changed. It's called Passover. And all of a sudden, we get this intricate, delicate art of the crow sitting at Sherry's grave in the snowed. And you see a door open. It's an actual picture of a door. There's a light. He's at her grave. He's holding a gun. An angel's looking over him. And he's just sitting there, and he's finding peace. He's kissing her. Is he kissing her goodbye, or is he saying that we're being reunited? He looks up, and there's the crow that supposedly brought his soul back, leaving, and it's blurry. And all of a sudden, he's kissing another woman, which is probably death, in my interpretation. And then you just see his eyes. He goes, "Remember when you said mine, and I said forever? You said only forever. It's forever now." And you just see a picture of a gun, and then a weeping angel. And then you see this. Now, I just realized I have a drawing of a man on a beach that completely ripped this off. That was in my subconscious. Damn it. Everybody's like, "I like that picture." And I'm like, "Oh, no." As I'm talking to you, I realized. I'm like, this is where it came from. So anyway. So The Crow, that gets to the heart of the matter like no other book. Like, I can't even consider this a comic at times. I know it's sequential art, but the subtext and the symbolism he has in it, he brings in poetry like Raymond Chandler Evening as he's walking up steps, and he's set a mood by all these cats being attracted to the crow as he's going up these steps to kill Joy Boy or whatever his name is and stuff, right? And he actually kicks in a door while that poem is going through his head. It was the first time, the only time a comic actually made me jump because I could hear the door kick in. He pulled me in so hard. So there you go. That's the one that gets to the heart of the matter. And I don't recommend reading it if it's raining and country music is playing. Okay. You will not survive the trifecta. All right. Don't do it.
That's a comic that could have gone terribly wrong, because if basically it's remember the Charles Bronson films Death Wish,
Yes.
and
Yes.
this is basically a comic book version of it, but with the elements of the fantastic
Yeah.
in it. And now those movies are not bad; they're pretty good films, the Death Wish films, right? And uh, but this comic could have been just something that could have been just because it comes in but at the end of the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And when already the Marvel and DC, in in part thanks to Frank Miller and Alan Moore, some of the writers, some of the editors, basically missed the point of Miller, missed the point of Moore. Basically, let's just go dark. Dark just means nihilistic violence.
Grim and gritty. Let's go grim and gritty.
Let's go right without missing the point of what they were actually doing.
Yeah.
And they missed the point. And so now this was an independent comic. It wasn't published by Marvel or DC. But I think what this book continues to appeal to people, because I know I have an acquaintance, and she allows her kids, who are now, all of them now in middle school, but when they were in 5th grade, I know the son one day is talking to me, and he goes, "Have you read The Crow?" And I said, I didn't know he read comics, and I said, "Yeah." I said, "How do you know about The Crow?" "Well, my mom had this book." I go, "Do you like The Crow?" And he goes, "Yes." And he began discussing it. Now he was a little bit wary because he knows it's adult material, and he
Right.
thought I was going to say something like some adults would say if they know about it. You shouldn't be reading that. But I think the kid approached me because he knows that's not the way I'm going to operate.
Right.
And I thought, well, what he liked about the book. I didn't even get to the part of it being inappropriate or whatever. And he really liked the story. He said some of it he didn't really understand it, but he really enjoyed it. And then so the book still continues to attract new readers, not a large body of readers, but there's substance to that book. You mentioned what you said at the end, Tim, about there's like a light at the end. There's that song by the Smiths, "There's a light that never goes out." I don't know if Smiths were part of the music playlist
Yeah.
that Obar had at the time. It probably would have been, given the music he was listening to
Right.
at the time, because it would have fit into that little world there. But the locally also, there's a man who comes to the comic shop that I frequent who collects Obar artwork, original artwork. He spends a lot of money, and he's in his early 50s. He read this when he was young, and he travels the country. He actually has original artwork from Obar, and when I saw him recently, he's presently trying to bid on a V for Vendetta page on Heritage.
David
But
Lloyd.
he wants to get some of the V for Vendetta stuff, but he says, one, it's hard to come across, and whenever you do see it, it's incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
And but yeah, and so but basically he's more of he's a fan of Obar,
Right.
to that point of he's met him many times, and he has some of the original artwork from The Crow that you have there.
Oh, that's
And
fantastic.
yeah,
Now
he
I do
is.
want to I do want to add in. I've met
Please
Obar.
do.
I've met Obar about 4 times, and whatever was going on the first time I met him, where he was all jittery and jumping around,
Mhm.
it could be interpreted as nerves. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So anytime I've met him after that, I've had much better conversations. And I got to see him watercolor. But go
Oh
ahead.
wow.
Yeah, I just realized I kind of left it like he was a big drug addict freaking me out. No, it was his
No, I
nerves,
don't think. No,
me
no, no,
being
no.
overwhelmed. Yeah, I was a little overwhelmed at the time.
No, I don't think so, Tim. I didn't get that impression. I don't think anyone here got
Yeah.
that impression. It's
Yeah.
just something that was part of his life,
Yeah.
and it's like discussing, Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. You mentioned drugs.
Right.
That's part of their life at the time.
Yeah.
Not just the song heroin, of course, but that they have. And, but
When I'm going to start singing. That's the third song you brought up, where I'm sitting here like, when it gets in my arm, but yeah,
I think if I just side note here, briefly, I had texted Tim this morning or last night about a film that I saw called Perfect Days.
I saw that I saw your text this morning.
And and I would just say, Tim, music in that film, including Lou Reed music, if you decide to watch this movie, I think it's integral to the film, and anyway, that's all I will say. And I don't want to ruin it for you, anybody else who wants to see the movie, because I saw it basically knowing just a little bit about it. No, I knew it was done by a director that I deeply admire, so I knew I would like the movie, but I didn't inquire much about what the movie was about. I didn't see any trailers about it, but I did know about the movie because it had won so many awards a few years ago. So I sat down and watched it from the beginning to the very end, including the credits, and then after the credits, which I'm glad that I did do. And it's the best movie I've seen all year.
I'll definitely check it out. Yeah.
Hey, good morning, Terrence. Oh, well, Terrence is here. I've already thanked him, but I'm not a Star Wars guy. But he encouraged, he was talking weeks back about Andor. And he really convinced me to watch it. And I decided to watch Andor within a couple of days' time. And it was absolutely excellent. I was completely enthralled by Andor. And then I went back and watched Rogue One, which I have not seen since it premiered, 10 years ago, it seems. And it's an excellent series. And anyway, Terrence convinced me to watch it. And I'm glad that he did. It was really well done. I'm not really a Star Wars guy.
Rogue One, maybe the first season of Mandalorian, and Andor, I've been hearing the same thing. I need to check that one out. But Rogue and Mandalorian, that's probably been the only Disney Star Wars products I've been able to handle. The second season, if you go that far with it, if you end up checking it out, your mileage may vary, but I liked it overall, especially the last episode. So I'm glad you're the second person. I didn't know about Comic Crack. You're the second person that told me Andor's all right. You know what I mean? So
it's very good. I mean, I was quite impressed by it. One, you don't have to be a Star Wars fan. You could be just a science fiction fan. But even if you're not a science fiction fan, it's really a story about revolution and the complicated parts of being a revolutionary, what leads to a revolutionary. And even Gilroy, who created the series and wrote the original film, he's kind of like me. He's not a Star Wars fan. I saw interviews with him after Andor. He says, I watched the original films when I was a kid, liked them, but my interest generally ended there.
Yeah.
So when I was offered to do Rogue One, I basically told him, I know nothing about Star Wars. I mean, I haven't kept up with anything. I'm assuming he had seen the prequels and everything, but he didn't have much of opinion about him. And then he did this. And then when he was asked to do the Andor series, it was the same thing, what am I going to do? And anyway, it's 26 hours. If you include,
oh my God.
If you include Rogue One, it's 26 hours. It's 24 episodes plus Rogue One. It's 26 hours of a novel. It feels like a novel. And anyway, enough about Star Wars. But
I may get around to it. Right now, I'm going episode by episode to watch the complete Rocky and Bullwinkle from beginning to end. So maybe,
can't go wrong with Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Now, Paolo, I do these on Sundays, and from what I understand in the past, Paolo has in Portugal lunch with family lasts all day. So Paolo, give me a yell if you want to do something, but I'm always assuming you have your lunch on Sunday, so you can correct me. Here I am, the Crow's on the list of U.S. classic comics I would publish in Portugal if I had the money.
He hasn't read it.
You're right, to lose on a publishing venture, and yet I've never read it myself.
Yeah, but given how well read Paolo is, I'm surprised.
I might have to remedy that if I can find a cheap copy. See, I also have a special edition that came out where he added pages years later. Comic Crack. This is what I was wanting to get to as you were talking, but I didn't want to be rude. Glad to convert a new Andor fan. Mando is solid. Exactly. That first season, I fell in love with what I saw. The writer himself has said he's not a Star Wars fan. So, but it sounds like he respects the source material. He's not coming in like Rian Johnson did and decide that he was going to do his
Yeah.
Star Wars instead of Star Wars.
Oh, and the other thing he informed me when he said Gilroy, and he's the man behind the Jason Bourne films.
Okay, that's awesome.
And that was the other part. I like those movies a lot.
Yeah.
And so when he said those two things, he wanted why he liked it, and then he mentioned Gilroy, and then I go, oh my God, that's the Bourne guy. So that's why I said, okay, I'll watch him, and I was in.
Awesome. Yeah. And you took the words right out of Comic Crack's mouth, apparently.
Oh.
All right, sir. What do you have for us?
Okay. Well,
I'll probably put you on Solo at some point. So
there are quite a few Love and Rocket stories that are just, I mean, the words there, love, right? Love, and rockets. But probably my favorite of the Jaime Hernandez stories, because it's the brothers who work on this thing,
right?
Is it's Jaime's stories is the story about Maggie and Hopi, right? Las Locas, the mechanics girls, and for me it's Maggie. I've always enjoyed Maggie, but it's that world that he created, right, in California, and such, but it's one story that he did, and it appeared in issue number 29 of Love and Rockets. It's one of the best known stories, and it's from March 1989. And the story is about a supporting character, Isabel. Here's the trade that collects some of these early issues, and that's Isabel. There.
I'm just gonna have to break down and hit eBay or something to get some of these.
What he does here, I think it's under 15 pages in this story. I'll just use the trade to show the artwork here. Is I made a video about this story on my channel.
Oh, I remember this.
You remember this one? Flies on the Ceiling is the name of the story. Flies on the Ceiling. But here you get a hint of what the story is going to be about. If you study each one of the panels, and you have some understanding, some hint as to who Isabel is. Now, in the Love and Rocket storyline, she appears almost like a witch-like character in the sense that she is very disheveled. Her hair is a mess, like in dreadlocks and such. She has this obsession about flies on the ceiling. She's always swatting them. She used to babysit Maggie when she was a little girl. She is a writer, has a few books published, but she doesn't really go out of her way to basically advertise these books. And what Jaime did, he decided to do like an origin story years into it, where we go back in time.
There we go.
That's when he goes back in time. And the story of Isabel is very, very tragic. And basically, is when we meet her here, I mean, this is basically going back in time, is that Isabel, when she was younger, she used to belong to a gang, a tough girls gang. She served some time in jail, and when she was out, she got her act together, and she has to go to college and study English. And so, basically, follow a very middle class path, and that's what her parents want. Now, she's an American of Mexican descent, but her parents are immigrants, so of course they want something better for their daughter, right? So they don't have to struggle. They want her to be a professional. She falls in love with a professor, a man named Rubens. And they get married, but things go terribly wrong. She has an abortion. She gets divorced from this man. Now, those things coming from a Catholic family, a conservative family traditionally, of a Mexican family, the divorce and the abortion, and coming from in her background with her father, who is very, very difficult. right? And she has a breakdown. So in our story, she decides to go to Mexico to try to get away from all, and that's what we see. We see her here. And while she's there, she meets this man who basically sees her, and he's got a son. His wife ran away, and never explained why she left the family. And basically, he needs help with his kid, and so he offers her room and board. And not that she's exactly a servant, but she's more kind of like a governess, so to speak. But if you can have governess for basically working class people,
Right.
and so she is quite. She seems very happy. Now, there's this wonderful panel here that Jaime does when the man she's there by the crucifix. She seems to be upset about something, and you can tell he's attracted to her. These panels, you study them closely, and they basically, what Jaime Hernandez is able just to portray in these things is very powerful in a very subtle way. And at one point, she shows him, I think it's like a diary she's been keeping. And the diary is of her past, the divorce, the abortion, and everything. And he says, "Why did you make me read this?" And she says, "I don't know. It's only fair." And he says, "Isabel, I'm not here to judge you. I couldn't if I wanted to. What I mean to say is, I would love you if you were the devil himself."
Oh.
So he's in love with her. But throughout here, like you see this woman here, this woman says, "I know who you are." And this is going to be the problem for Isabel, is her guilt. Her guilt. She can't get over it. And the guilt is almost metaphorical. She starts seeing these images. And that's the part about Isabel. Mentally, she's basically unraveling. And we're not sure what this image is. We don't know who this is. And she, at one point, she goes into her room. The crucifix falls. She hears voices. And it says basically, it's not your sins, but your guilt that allows me to come to you. Never decide who the me is. And she can't stand this. I mean, she's basically having a breakdown. And she doesn't know, and she's basically having difficulty being happy with this man who treats her really well. The little boy loves her, and she seems to be happy, but she can't really deal with her grief. And here is the part that it seems to suggest that she's pregnant again, and that it is either a flashback of her first abortion or she has a second abortion. They're in Mexico. And that's when she begins to basically let herself go. See her hair? These are just powerful images. And she starts to imagine a happy life with this new man. Is that possible? Is that possible? And the answer is no. She leaves without explanation. And after being gone, the man sees her at a market. And he says that she's going to go back home now because her father has died. But she says he refuses to give me up without saying who the he is. He's going to be waiting for me in the States. I may turn up as flies on your ceiling, he said. And then she leaves. Now, the stories prior to this, subsequent stories, is when we see Isabel. Again, when you see her, she's always dressed in black, very goth-like. She's not stable at all. Sometimes she's just completely naked in her room. Maggie is very close to her, as is Hopi. They look after her when they can. There's a story in Love and Rockets about her younger brother named Speedy, which is a really, I almost picked that one, The Death of Speedy, where Speedy, her brother, commits suicide. It's a powerful story in Love and Rockets. Um, but this one is just very, very haunting. It's something that when I read this and what Jaime Hernandez did here, um, I mean, you really feel for her. And you really feel for this man who's in love with her and really can't understand. I mean, he knows what she's been through, but he can't get into her head. And he says, I will love you, even if you're the devil himself. That's unconditional love.
Yeah.
But she can't let this go. Not just the trauma of the guilt, but obviously it's just her nature, the difficulty growing up with her family, whatever expectations they had for her. And in the Love and Rockets storyline, she would be, I guess, now in her 60s. Because think about Love and Rockets, all the characters age.
Right.
Right now, Maggie and Hopi are in their 50s. And she's still around. So in any event, that story, Flies in the Ceiling, is just a devastating story. I've reread this many times, and every time I look at it, I think of something else. But
yeah, I made that very trade. I may go ahead. I bought a few things off Amazon for super cheap here lately, but I think it's time just to find this Flies on the Ceiling because I have questions and I just need to read it. It's amazing how life experience and things like that can make you look at something like that. Your reaction is so different from mine, just from what I've seen here. So mine may not be accurate, but I'm starting to think like he's in love with the idea of her. He doesn't really know who she is. And
I like that. Yeah, that's true. I think that's true. I think that's true. And it's interesting because when Jaime drew, I don't have it here, but in one of the earliest, I think it was the first issue of Love and Rockets, you see a woman who's Isabel typing away in a house. But I don't think he realized that would be the Isabel that he would end up using later on. I think that was just a page that he did that looked really cool. And there's a little ode to Mobius in those two pages because even a character appears who looks like Mobius, like Larzak from Mobius.
Yeah.
And but I think later on he decided to use that, say, I can do something with this. And then he ended up doing this remarkable story, Flies in the Ceiling.
Right.
So very, very powerful stuff.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that one up. That gives me a starting point. I think I've said it many times before here and there, but I still kick myself, but that's just how it happened. But I never had access to Love and Rockets. I never had a comic book shop around here that had it right there. I'm sure it came through over the years. Don't get me wrong. I saw the advertisements for it. I got the gist of what it was and everything, and it was really more of a staple of the 80s, the way it was presented. Like it was that's when they were still calling them alternative comics, a time I wish I could go back to. You didn't have access to those, so there was a mystique. And I think Scott Connor used to do the show Cavern of Chaos. I can't believe it, but I think it was about 9 years ago. It's been a while, but I ended up with the Hernandez brothers and their group at a bar in the hotel across the road from Heroes Con. I was right there, and they were very welcoming. They had picked a nest in a little bit of a corner. You could see the window outside and see Heroes Con, the building, right across the street that night. Place was packed. Eric Powell's walking around. All these guys are walking around, and I'm like, this is the Hernandez brothers, and I have absolutely nothing to talk to them about because I never read 11 Rockets. I felt horrible for some reason. You know what I mean? Like they're right here. And I started thinking of the people through YouTube and stuff that were fans of them. And I'm like, I don't know to tell them I met them or not. They deserve to be here. It was like a survivor's guilt. You know what I mean? And I was ashamed of myself to be an esteemed comic book collector, who's knowledgeable, and yet here I am in front of two of the alternative greats, and I don't know shit. You know what I mean? It wasn't humbling. It was like somebody else deserves it. You know what I mean? Yeah, but they were right there. Their wives, I guess, is who they were. They had these 50 styles dresses with rockets on them and hearts and stuff. It was very cool. Their table was very cool. But yeah, of all the comic book creators I've run across all the years, that's the one where I could have sat down and actually sit down and had a drink with them because they were willing. You know what I mean? They were all like right there. You know.
It's interesting about Love and Rockets. I mean, I live in the part of Texas that I live. There's a large Hispanic community here. It's very big, and but even among independent people who read independent titles, Love and Rockets is just not a book that people read, and it's become almost like a joke. The recent issue of Love and Rockets, the shop, like Beth, the co-owner, says, I accidentally ordered 7 issues of it, and so she said accidentally because only myself, one other guy who's been reading comics his entire life, and then one guy who comes in every once in a while, we're the only 3 people who read Love and Rockets.
Yeah.
Those 7 issues, because the last issue came out like 4 or 5 months ago, they're still there. They don't move. They've even discounted them at 50%.
Yeah.
And the thing is, and it's extremely rare you have anybody read it. And it's, even when I was reading it in the 80s, among my peers, only one other guy was reading it. And he was a punk rocker. And but otherwise, no one was really interested in these stories. And even though for some of them, it was basically reflected their life because they were sons or daughters of immigrants from Mexico and such. But it doesn't appeal to them, And we've discussed this before. One of the biggest fans of Love and Rockets is not an American. He's our friend Earl Grey from Germany.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But that's the universality of the stories. They appeal to everyone because, again, they get to the heart of the matter.
Ooh, very nice. Very nice. Work that in there. That's fantastic. I've got 2 free comic book days books over here. I found 1 issue of actual Love and Rockets and stuff like that. It's not enough. Just picking up 2, 3 things, I can already tell it's not enough. Because like you said, you kind of grow with the characters due to the fact that they age and go through the eras. Yeah. I'm not the same person I was in 1988. I'm not the same person I was in 1998. And that was just enough for me to get in there to realize same thing for these characters, but not as extensive as actual humans. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like living, breathing people. But I got a feeling this may be as close as you can get in the medium. Let me silence this. Work is going off, and I'm off as far as I'm.
We're like a doctor, Tim. They got to page you 24/7, like a medical doctor.
Never mind. They're doing something that has nothing to do with work. I guarantee it.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
The heart of the matter. I love that. Somebody needs to make a clip of that where you did that. You know what? I'm gonna stick with the indie thing here, right? We talked about love and loss, and pain, and some heavy stuff. And now here's something that's a bit more philosophical, right? I saw this in the movie first, right? I think, right? And I know who this person was. Again, very limited with what I was able to pick up, not having a comic book shop and stuff. And that doesn't matter because I've learned over the years, a lot of people, this wasn't as accessible as a lot of people would like to make out, in my circles, at least until the movie and stuff, especially specifically this trade. But when I was a kid, I've talked about how we were poor. Parent was very young, married this really guy, married a very complicated person. Let's put it that way. Okay. Named Mad Dog. That's why people actually talked about him and stuff. And we did not actually own a landline phone until I was about 7 years old in 1989. And I was excited to have a landline phone. And, I'm of that era where you would lock the door and you would babysit yourself. Not a big deal. I know it sounds horrible to people.
No,
you know
what I mean? It was,
yeah, right. And one thing
it was normal. It was actually normal.
Yeah. So one of the things I did is I was like, I have a phone book. And the first thing I did, I wanted to see our number in it. And then I wanted to see if there were other people with the same names. This is around 1980. Yeah. Now check this out. There was another. I'm going to make up the names. I don't want to put out their real names and stuff, but we'll say there was another Mad Dog and Puss out there in the same town I was in, and they were right next door. We had moved in to people who had the exact same
Oh
name.
wow.
Yes. Yes, right. So I'm like, wow, there's other people out there, right? Now, flash forward to I don't know what year the movie came out. I have it, I love it, I've watched it dozens of times. But flash forward to American Splendor coming out. Okay. And Paul Giamatti does this right out of the book, does one of Picar's a few pages of Picar that Robert Crumb had done here, and it's called the Harvey Picar Name and Story. You can get this on YouTube, just this scene, the phone number, the phone list, phone number, Harvey Picar story, whatever, right? And there's not a lot to show because he's just talking to you. Robert Crumb just drew pages and pages of Paul talking to you, and it's absolutely captivating because there's so much there you can talk about. He grew up with the name Harvey Picar. Harvey Picar, he thought was an unusual name. He talked about people pronouncing it wrong and stuff. And then he talked about errors in his life where he got his first apartment, his first landline. Then he got married. Then he got divorced. And I'm probably adding stuff to it, right? But we walked through his life with the phone book and finding out about people walking up to him in Cleveland and finding out there's other Harvey Picars, not so much that there's other Harvey Picars in the world, but so many in Cleveland. He had people walk up to him to say, I'm sorry about your father passing away. And he got the paper and found the obituary for a Harvey Picar Sr. who left behind a Harvey Picar Jr., you know. And you're going through this, and what he's touching on, the way you can interpret it if you're a thinking man or whatever, you know what I'm saying, is I did that when I was a kid, number one. So I'm like, oh, other people did this. You know, I never really talked about it. It was I'm a kid in the, you know, I mean, it's not something you go out and tell your friends like, hey, I went through the phone book. You know what I mean? Like big, you know what I mean? But it was fascinating to have somebody else do this and then think about all the moments in their life and what it did to them. How this Harvey Picar affected this Harvey Picar because his father died and he thought about his mortality and he thought about this and it made him think about that in his life and places he was and where. And in just a few pages with that one picture that Robert Crumb sort of drew over and over and altered a little bit here and there as he was speaking and stuff, man, you're thinking about your place in life and where you're at and where you were. You know what I mean? And it's so subtle because it's straightforward. But this is where it takes you. It makes you think more and more. Our mortality, the fact that we're not unique. You read it and it makes you think a little bit more of other things. The only closest thing that I can come to something like this is that it started out as a duet with Lemmy from Motorhead and Ozzy Osbourne. What you really want to see is Lemmy of Motorhead doing the acoustic version of a song called I'm Not a Nice Guy After All. And the whole song is about him realizing that he was not the chosen one that he thought when he was young and cocky. You know what I mean? They make, you know, if you sit down and read this and then listen to that song and stuff like that, I think it's a matter of where you were versus where you're at. And it's just a natural process of aging. Okay. I can read a little excerpt, but like I said, it's pretty straightforward. Then one day, a person I worked with expressed his sympathy to my. Let me start over. Then one day, a person I worked with expressed her sympathy to me concerning what she thought was the death of my father. I knew my father to be alive and in good health, and asked her where she'd gotten the notion that he died. Then he's scratching his head. She pointed out an obituary notice in the newspaper for a man named Harvey Picar. One of his sons was named Harvey. These were the other Harvey Picars. And then he just stops for a minute. 6 months later, Harvey Picar Jr. died. So the son ended up dying 6 months later. Although I'd never met neither man, I was filled with sadness. What were they like? I thought. It seemed that our lives had been linked in some indefinable way. The next year's telephone directory contained my name only. So after all these years, through his point of view, he's the last Harvey Picar. But the story does not end there. For 2 years later, another Harvey Picar appeared in the directory. What kind of people are these? Where do they come from? What do they do? What's in the name? Who is Harvey Pekar? And that's me. Okay, we were joking about the Woody Allen, like, oh, that's my life on the screen. That page is that was me.
Wow.
7 years old, wandering out there. What do people do every day when they're rich? What do they do? I wondered about the world out there and stuff, and I wondered about people with the same names and stuff. Just a 7-year-old kid, but nowhere near as artistic as heavy as this. Just a kid wondering. You know what I mean? In his house, wondering. And then what did I do? I probably made a bowl of Fruity Pebbles, grabbed a comic book, or turned on the TV. Who knows? But that right there is almost Shakespearean. This is how, to me, that page is how Shakespeare would write if he'd became a writer today. A rose is a rose. Well, what's in the name? Who is Harvey Pekar?
Tim, what you just said, I think if you decide to watch that Wim Wenders film, Perfect Days, I think you will enjoy this film based on what you just talked about here with Pekar.
Yeah.
And because that film touches on those issues. I've never read anything by Pekar. I remember seeing him on, was it on David Letterman when he appeared?
Yeah. I mean, I knew about those, but I never watched one,
And I remember the film, but I've never read any of the American Splendor books. And it's one of those things that just has passed me by. And I always forget about it until like now when you discussed it now, And because certainly I never hear Harry Pekar's name mentioned, at all. But I'm glad that you did. And so, but that's really nice. I mean, it's almost like a much nicer version of Bukowski, the writer Charles Bukowski, who had a novelist and short story writer who had a grim view on life growing up in California. But in any event, wow, no, I'm glad you mentioned Mr. Pekar.
Well, like I said, the little scene, it's like a 4-minute scene from the movie.
Yeah.
Paul Giamatti did it. And, there's little animations behind him as he's walking around, and you see little Harvey Pekars walking behind him down the street and stuff real quick and stuff. It's wonderful. I mean, I just think it's absolutely wonderful. It's not something I need to hype. If you want to watch it, and you're either going to like it or you're not. And I think it's one of those things where I'm like, this is great. This is nice, So.
But certainly about who we are in the sense of, let me phrase that. I mean, we're reaching a point in our age where we only have a certain amount of time left on this planet.
Yeah.
And the idea is that we're here. We had our parents. Parents were here because they had parents. And when you think about it, we trace back and go back, what, the 200,000 years when the first Homo sapiens were discovered, right? We're still here. Our ancestors go that far back,
mm-hmm.
And it's a way of saying, maybe some way of saying of our immortality. I mean,
that's one of the things I got out of that. He said for 2 years he was the only Harvey Pekar. He thought he was it, and then 2 years later, well, there's another one. It goes on. Life is going to go on.
Yeah.
I mean, see, now I'm sitting here talking to you. I never really talked to anybody about this and bounced it off them and stuff. And now I'm sitting here thinking, was Harvey Pekar, did he make his name a metaphor for life? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, there's discussion to be had there.
Now, his books are autobiographical, correct? Everything he writes is about his life, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm going to have to look him up. I'm going to have to get his books. And I
mean, I think this is enough. If you can find this kind of trade. The other things are like My Cancer Year. The artwork goes back and forth. Some are better. Oh, well, okay. Here's where I went through another reading. Apparently, this is where I quit. I found my missing pizza menu. Yeah.
Why did you quit there?
I have no idea. The Maggie's oral history. Yeah. Like I said, a lot of it is slice of life, not all of it. Very little of it is actually that philosophical. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm sitting here like containing myself. I'm ready to go places now. I'm like, nah, I'm all right. But the American Splendor movie, I think, is fantastic.
It's a good
And
film.
that'll make you kind of decide if you really want to delve into his books. I got all excited because I've got one. I found the one magazine I think came out in 1990 or something. The magazine, I don't know if he tried to get one out a year or something like that. It was very
Mm,
sporadic,
mm.
because he was kind of paying for it for himself, and he never quit his job as a record keeper at a VA hospital. He never
Ah,
made big money at the comics. He got the
yeah,
scratch money
that
from the
I
movie.
figured.
Yeah,
That I
but
figured.
it came out real sporadically. But I've got the one issue where even Alan Moore did a page or did something in one of the magazines, so he started getting noticed over the years. It was sort of like Will Eisner there in the early 80s. You either knew who he was or you didn't. You know what I mean? And I got the feeling Harvey P. Carr was the same way. You either
For
knew.
some reason, when I would watch Letterman, it didn't register with me that he did comics. I would always wonder why Letterman would have this guy on. He was interesting to watch. Seems always kind of cantankerous, a little bit bitter, and he was nice to have
He,
on day. But I
he,
never knew he was a comic book guy.
well, to be honest, P. Carr was like in the Walt killing stuff. Robert Crumb was his friend before Robert Crumb became famous.
Mm,
That's touched in the movie and a few things, but basically Harvey P. Carr was a relic and leftover of the '60s. Even though he never was much like Robert Crumb, he was never a hippie. He'd go
yeah.
around collecting jazz records, and what people don't realize is that there's magazines out there from the '50s and '60s, and maybe even the '70s, where he's a music critic of jazz. He would write up reviews for jazz and stuff. So a little bit of a beatnik with a hippie, super liberal, and then emotionally unstable when his wife would go away. But he's human. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's all out there. I'm not
Yeah.
saying anything that's not right there in front of you. These aren't slams. That's the charm. And then you see him, you go through life with him. Yeah.
Mm-mm.
So you want me to do another one, or do you got another one there, sir?
Let's see. I'll go with the other one here. Let's see. What is that? I've been watching a lot of movies, and the past month or so, movies that I like and that I rewatched, and even some new stuff like Perfect Days. Um, and it was what 3 4 weeks ago? About 3 weeks ago, for some reason, I was thinking about Paul Newman, and so I decided to rewatch The Hustler, and with Piper Laurie, Paul Gleason, George C. Scott, and written by Walter Tevis, who later on would write The Man Who Fell to Earth, into the David Bowie film, same writer. So from there, I decided to watch 12 Angry Men, and then The Verdict. Um, and I think The Verdict may be my favorite Paul Newman film and would be in my top 50 films. And so I began going back to movies that I really, really like. And there's one film which I had given this one away to people over the years. And so when I was looking for a copy, I didn't have one. And the film is, Gallipoli. You remember this one with Mel Gibson?
I'm not comfortable saying I do or not. I remember seeing it for rent. I'll tell you that. So yeah.
It's about the Australian company in World War One fighting for the British against the Turks. Oh, I thought you had seen this film too.
I feel like I have, but it's been so long. Did it come out in the '80s?
Yeah, it's so when Mel Gibson was cranking out these wonderful films back then,
I think
dramatic roles.
I think it was on something, but I don't think I've watched it since the '80s. So yeah.
Yeah, it's Peter Weir. I think he also did the movie Witness with Harrison Ford,
Okay.
um, and just a wonderful director. Well, in that case, I'm not going to ruin this for you who if you haven't seen in Gallipoli. And basically, it's about a friendship between Mel Gibson's character and another friend of his, who before the war, before the war in 1914, they're both runners, and this friend is Olympic material. He's that good. He can run. I don't know. A lap in I don't know how many seconds. In any event, they get drafted and to fight for the British Empire. Although, Australia had not been attacked, so neither had the British, as these worlds tend to be. And so, but all these alliances are there. And so they get drafted and they sent off to Gallipoli to fight the Turks. There is a powerful scene towards the end, and as you know, it's trench warfare, where the commander blows the whistle. The men look at the photographs of their loved ones. Some of them are writing letters, because if you look over, if you can, sniper doesn't get you. No man's land is littered with bodies of the people who went over a few hours earlier. None of them made it to the other side. They all got mowed down. And you're next. The commander's about to whistle that whistle. So in this film, you have the commander finally says, "This is just a bloodbath. We're not making any progress." But the man above him is ordering him, "You have to send these men over." So he wants to have that overridden to, I guess, the commanding general. But he's on the other side of the trench, way down at the end. So Mel Gibson and his friend, they're both there. They're set to go. But Mel's asked to run and, make it through snipers and everything, get to the commander. Oh, yeah, because the phone lines are cut. The phone lines are cut, and they can't reach the general. So this, I guess, is a captain. He wants to get the order overridden by the supreme commander, whoever that may be. So he sends Mel Gibson to go over. To basically reach the general, and hopefully the general convince him, saying to halt what's going on here, and to make it back in time. In the meantime, his friend is there. And that's at the climax of the film. It's a very powerful scene, scenes in this movie. And it's a devastating film. I like it a lot. I've watched it many times. Now, this is about comics, not about films. But when I read this story, this is from basically, let me get to the comics. This is Mort Stinder by the author of The Etronaut. Now, The Etronaut is now getting a lot of mileage because it's on Netflix, El Etronauta, by Hector Herman Esterhel, one of Argentina's greatest cartoonists, writers of comic strips. And this one he did with Alberto Brescia. And those of you not familiar with Mort Cinder is an immortal who's been around since the 300. He was one of the original Spartans. And there's a story about him in here, how he survives against the Persians. And so he's an immortal who's a witness to history, because everything here is filled with some kind of historical reference of some kind. They're powerful stories. Each one's maybe 10, 15 pages. Okay. Now, the one I'm going to talk about, though, takes place in the present. And now the comics are in black and white. Okay. And
let's give a quick hello to La Rosa, who just popped in.
Hey, Rosa. Yeah. And this one is called Charlie's Mother. Now, what you have here is Mort right there, and he's with his friend, who's a man who collects antiques named Ezra. And they see this old woman here by a train station. Now, the writing by Esterheld is first rate. He writes like Bradbury, but if Bradbury can be a little bit sentimental, which is fine because it worked for Bradbury brilliantly, Ray Bradbury. With Esterheld, it's the sentimentality can be very heartbreaking, and not in the that's sad way. No, it really gets to you. And this is one of those stories, at least for me. And it's the writing by Esterheld. Now, this is in translation, not in Spanish, and this is about Mort Cinder. Remember, he's been around for thousands of
Right.
years. It's never
Right.
explained why he's an immortal. But he says ports and stations, places where people's paths and destinies cross over. There's something that fascinates me about ports and stations. He's telling his friend Ezra. And then he looks at this old lady here. And what happened is here is a man who works there. He's the switchman, I'm sorry. This woman here, Tim, she sits here every day waiting for someone to get off this train. And this man who works there, he feels bad for it. It's not explained why, but he brings flowers to her every day while she's waiting. And at that point, Mort Cinder looks at the old man and looks at the woman who's even older than he is. And there's something familiar about both of them to Mort Cinder. So Mort goes off and talks to the woman. And the woman is there. She says, he comes up to her and he says, "Are you related, ma'am, to Charles McLaren? Are you related to him?" And she says, "Do you have news about him? I waited so long. No one knows anything about him. Everyone says he must be dead, but I don't believe it. And others tell me terrible things about him. What do you know about him, sir?" And now we go into the past. We go back to World War I in France, trench warfare. Mort Cinder was there, and he remembers a young kid named Charlie. Same situation as in Gallipoli. Their men are going over. They're getting slaughtered. Nothing is happening. So the commander asked Charlie to basically go down and ask the commander what he wants to do. He says, "Are there reinforcements coming? Do we stay here? What do we do? What do we do?" So he sends Charlie. Okay. But when Charlie gets over there, though, Charlie, because he's terrified, when he arrives to the commander, he tells him that they're already dead. The company has been wiped out. Because he's getting there is dangerous. Right. And getting back is dangerous. But then another man shows up and says, "Sir, they're asking for Sergeant Brown requests your orders." And he goes, "Wait a minute. Charlie just reported that he's the only survivor from the unit." And Charlie then says, "But it seemed to me that the last attack had wiped everyone out." Okay. So he lies about everything because he's terrified. So at this point, Mort Cinder's there. And Mort Cinder's job is now to run back and tell the company to stand down. And that there's no reinforcements. There's no reinforcements coming. So if anything, they should just retreat. But on the way there, Mort is knocked down by some kind of, I think, from artillery. So he doesn't get there in time. So the company is indeed wiped out. Now we jump decades later. And now he knows this is why Charlie never came back. His mother's been waiting for him there for all these years. But this is why he didn't come back. He was ashamed, or so he thinks. And then we see Charlie. He's that man who works there, who's been bringing his mother flowers. But she doesn't recognize him. He says, "I came back many years ago, but my mother didn't even recognize me. I was barely a man when I left. The war did the rest. The war and regret. Every day," he says, "I see her there. waiting for the trains. I want to tell her that I'm already here, but I can't. Someone told her that I betrayed my comrades. I don't know what she fears more, that I'm dead, or that she'll learn that I was a coward. Now Mort tells him, you have to tell her the truth. But he says, I can't do that. So then Mort takes it upon himself to go talk to the old woman. And that's exactly what he does. He says, he tells the mother, and then he comes back and tells Charlie, go speak to your mother. I've told her everything. And go, Charlie, your mother's waiting for you. And Ezra, the friend, says, what did you tell her? And Mort says, the truth. Charlie has no idea how much a mother can bear. A mother doesn't care about heroism in a battle. A mother is much more interested in the small kindnesses of every day. The flowers every afternoon, the small kindnesses that Charlie never stopped doing for her, that more than eclipses his cowardice. They washed away all the crimes of the past, including his betrayal at the Chemin de Mons. And anyway, Charlie was so young back then, he wasn't even 19. And that's how the story ends. But this picture of this man here, where the mother doesn't even recognize him.
Yeah.
And but he takes her flowers every day. But he's so ashamed. He can't get over this to discuss this. Tell his mother who he is. But like Mort says, there's some things a mother doesn't care about, and is not that concerned about. And you've been bringing her flowers every day. This is for years. Whenever she's there waiting for him to come back on this train. And he's been there all along, showing these small acts of kindnesses. And I guess you could say a mother's love forgives everything.
Yeah.
Even failures in her own son. But again, given the situation, it's very human what he did. Yeah.
And on the other part of this is on the outside, life experience and stuff. And I'm sure that this was not what the author was going for. I'm sure it's very real to let me get off this. Sorry, I have you on solo. But what I've gotten out of it, like I said, it's great discussion stuff, is that I'm wondering if he touched on any part of, it's kind of the thing where sometimes we are the only ones that keep our most embarrassing moments and greatest failures alive, and it's in our head because no one else thinks about them nor chooses to remember them until you remind them. And even then, when you remind them, it's a faded memory because we were all in our own linear, writing our own story of our life is in our head with our memories. We're still very egocentric just because we have a brain and our perception of life is through our eyes. So we are our own story. You follow me? So when you have immortal characters and things like that and everything like that, how many of those memories are they the only ones keeping alive when everyone else is dead and they're still carrying it? Why? Does it define us? Does your failure define you? Or is that what you're making? I'm ready to talk. I'm like,
What did it? The Mort Cinder, I think there's maybe 7 or 8 stories here. And he's been around again for a couple of thousand years. He's met a lot of people. He has a lot of memories. He doesn't forget things. He does not. That's the thing about the memory. He doesn't forget things. And but he's a witness a lot to human history, and just to human behavior, and in a very realistic way. And it's something that I wish Esther had explored it more, but he was doing so many comics at the time. Um, but Estrahel himself, those of you who know a little bit about the history about the Eternaut, this is him and his family. This is a biography done about him. It's only been published in Spanish. And he had 4 daughters and his wife. And the tragedy is that in 1776, when the military coup in Argentina occurred, and they began to clamp down on the militant groups at the time, but also anybody who was critical of the government in a way that they thought was subversive. And people weren't being arrested, they were being kidnapped. There was no due process of any kind. And they were tortured, as we know. And thousands are the ones that are considered disappeared, presumed murdered. And 5 of those people were Estrahel and his 4 daughters, 2 of whom were pregnant. And one of the kids was given to the family. But the other kid that was born while there, didn't know what happens to him. And the way it worked back then is the government would take those kids, give them to government officials to be raised up in a very patriotic way.
Yeah.
As good Christians. And then the mothers and the parents would be killed. Either the ashes would be burned, or they would take it on planes and thrown into the ocean. This way, they would call it be the disappeared. The government could say, there's no bodies, so what crimes have we committed? And so let me show you pictures here of the family as they were. Yeah, here are all the girls. The only one that survived was a mother. A mother's grief when her husband and 4 daughters, one of them who was shot by the police, she attended that funeral, but the others, she never knew what happened to them.
So we have a parent outliving her children in real life. Yeah.
She died a few years ago because she became one of the big advocates for human rights based on what happened to her family. And Estrahel, because they were arresting the daughters. Now, my friend, these are not arrests. Arrest is you have the right, you have some due process. There is no due process here. They're kidnapped, tortured. Some would be released. Many would be killed. Estrahel himself, when he knew, he continued to write comics. I think it was the Eternaut he continued to write. How he would do it. He knew they were after him. He would phone in the scripts. He would phone in the scripts, and the artist then would draw him.
Yeah.
He would phone payphones because he knew the government officials were after him.
Oh my God.
Eventually, so basically, he died doing his work to the end. And eventually they got him. We know
I can't believe they didn't go into the, I don't know what I'm looking for, the offices of the
oh, they did. They did.
Yeah.
No, he was already gone.
And they kept publishing them. Wow.
Yeah. And so, this one chronicles a lot of the stories about the daughters from the mom and the last meeting she had with her daughters. One daughter was, at one point, the day she was kidnapped, she was having lunch with her mother, and she said she wanted to leave the militant group, the Montoneros, and she wanted to become a doctor. She was leaving that in the past. And the mother, it was the last time she was going to see her daughter again. Because the men that would drive up, one, they wouldn't be in uniform. That was one thing that was strategically. You wouldn't be in uniform. You'd be plain clothes. At one point, the police said that the military, the military denied they had anything to do with it. But then it was discovered, no, it was the military and the police. They were working hand in hand. So this nice car would show up. Men in suits would get out and just take you, Tim, and throw you into the car.
Right.
And that was it. Good luck. And of course, the sadism that occurred in these things, it went much. So whenever the government officials would say, well, there was assassinations of police officers, which was true. There was bombings. That was true. But again, you didn't arrest these people. You kidnapped them. And then the rampant, the rape that occurred of the women, the raping of the men, the use of dogs in some of these sessions, Tim. Suddenly you're thinking, okay, now you're okay. And then killing them, throwing them out of the planes. And so this went from 76 to 83. And Estrahel and his family were some of those victims.
I see, and I imagined, just as a kid and things, we'll move forward here in a second. But I can't help but imagining a lot of people don't realize that we're exposed to a whole lot due to the internet and better communication and things, right? So you hear about these things. So there's, even as they're horrifying as they are, you're still having not a clue. Now imagine a time where you have absolutely no idea that people are capable of doing this and it's being done to you out of nowhere. No preparation, no little. There's a whole level of horror to me when it's just done to you. The Aborigines that I read through a Neil Gaiman book, supposedly would decide to go look at their 12-year-old kid, their man. Now you're a man. Now you're going on the hunting party with us, and they would take them out hunting. And the next thing I know, they're grabbed, they're laid out, they pull their penis out, they lay it across a rock, and they cut the foreskin off without telling you that they're going to do it. This is can you imagine how horrifying that is? So that's what I'm trying to get at. That's what always puts me in that mind when things used to happen back in the day before we had this. There's just a whole level of horror where you don't know what's happening or what's coming next. It's the unknown. And what you described happening from 78 to 83 and stuff, that to me, that just makes it even more inhumane, no idea that people are capable of doing that,
Now that history that fascinated me when I began to read writers from Argentina back in the 90s, and I had some idea of the history. And but I've been thinking about some of those writers recently basically because they knew each other. It's like we know each other here, right? I live down here, and although my parents are from Mexico and I was born here, that there's some kind of questions regarding my papers. Am I going to be detained? Right? I'm not going to be tortured, right? But am I going to be detained in some way because my papers weren't in order, and who knows what? Am I going to get due process of some kind, depending which agency of the government here arrests me, or detains me, right? And so it's been on my mind recently because of what's going on here in recent months. But this story, that's a very powerful story by Esther Held. But the thing is, his writing, his stories are all like that. He really addresses these matters in a very realistic way. And he even writes some short stories. I have one from the point of view of a German soldier during World War II. I can't think of the context of it, but maybe for another conversation. But he really treated everyone in a very humane way. Yeah. Even though he himself was treated in a very inhuman way by his own government.
Wow. I'm trying to find a certain page here because we've talked about some dark stuff, and I want to find something a little bit more enlightening. And it's killing me that I can't find it.
Anyway, but I recommend the film Gallipoli, those of you who have not seen it.
Oh, absolutely. Give me just a second here. Sorry. I feel like I'm being rude. I told LaRossa the next book that comes up she may like, and then I realized that two of the writers I have here are now a bit controversial. And with one of them, I don't see it. With the other one, I wasn't surprised because I've read his works, and to me, it's laid out there. But would you be up for a part 3 of this?
Absolutely, Tim. Yeah.
Yeah. But I may just have to describe the story because I'm not finding the pages. But it's
Is it the writer that I'm thinking about? Is it the writer that I'm thinking about?
Well, the first one, I was going to tell LaRossa that just from her memory, she's always, I don't know if she's ever read this. I'm sure she's heard about it, but I was going to go into Jaka's story because we were going to save that for last, right? Yeah. And then I have a little Neil Gaiman, but I've realized we have talked about the Crow and loss and life and the government and things like that go really bad. And then there's one that's very inspiring, yet I've introduced this book to people like Charlton 66 and actually had some of these issues out of the dollar box and handed it to them so they could read. I've actually given this to about 4 or 5 people, so it's inexpensive. And when they read it, they're a little bit blown away. So, but the part that's inspiring is what it's, here it is. Okay, we got it here. So basically, it's a little light superhero stuff, right? We'll do a part 3. I've got some gaming I would like to talk about next time. Of course, the Jaka, we're going to spend a little bit of time to that. And I got some superhero stuff, right? But this one is Final Crisis tie-in. Yeah, the Final Crisis tie-in, which I don't really think this is a Final Crisis tie-in, but it works, right? I like how every time it focuses, we're getting that, right? Hey, Cerebus is something I have read but haven't finished it due to not having the whole thing. What do you say I talk about this real quick? We go into Jaka's story. You up for that? And then
Absolutely.
we'll do a part three.
Absolutely. I was
All right. So
Dave
before we
said
get
it's fine with me.
yeah, Jaka's story. You're in. I think you're in for a treat. I like it. I mean, I don't know, but anyway. So Final Crisis in this is basically there were three legions over the years. We had our proper legion from the 50s up to the 80s, and then Zero Hour made one, and then Mark Wade and Barry Kitson. Sorry for Kitson, man. You know, I feel like he worked his butt off, but they had a horrible version of the Legion, right? So then we have Final Crisis going on. This is like one of the last great books to come out before the DC 52 because it's the story of the three legions where they all have to come together to fight an ultimate evil. You know what I'm saying? So we get to see all these versions. And but it's also written by Jeff Johns and George Perez, and this is actually part three of a trilogy started years before. Yeah, I'm just gonna go on. You tell me if I go out. You know,
No, those, can't go
the
wrong with
yeah.
Johns or Pettis at all.
But the magic of this is that Superman, they're returning the Legion into the mainstream. Superman is now again was a member of the Legion as Superboy. They brought back Superboy. And that's all you really need to know. John Byrne took all that out, messed up the history. And they finally got it right. So they just acknowledge all three of them. And there's tons of splash pages by George Perez, where they're fighting Superboy Prime and Mordru and all this stuff, you know. And if you're not a Superman, a Legion of Superheroes aficionado, well, you don't have to be. This is really all you need to jump in there to figure out what's going on. But the thing about being the Legion that Superman brought up when you started figuring out in part one of the trilogy, I've got them on the shelf here. That was a Justice Society crossover by Brad Meltzer and Jeff Johns about 4 or 5 years before this, is that Batman asked him about, they're a bunch of kids. What are you talking about? He goes, we weren't just, he said, we weren't just a super team. We were Legion because they take the continuity. Legion of Superheroes had some dark moments. Let me look at this. Hold on. I don't know what's going on. Am I still there? Yeah.
You're still here, Tim. You're good. You're switching again.
You know what we say when things like this happen is now a real
It
Howler
would not
Mouse
be
thing.
a Howler Mouse live stream without
So get to
technical.
the point. Yeah, get to the point. I've talked about before how they had some. I'm gonna let me unhook the camera.
That's fine,
Make
Tim.
sure I got I'm gonna unhook the camera. All right. So the biggest thing is that I've talked about before. The Legion of Superheroes had some dark moments in the '60s when you realize these are teenagers. Lightning Lad was killed. There was technology to where you had like just a steel rod, like an antenna, if you will. And if electricity shot through it, your life force would leave you, go through that, and bring the dead person to life. And that's why they were Legion. You know, the Justice League, we're a team, we're going to fight evil and do all this stuff. But with Legion, you were Legion for life. Okay. And I just lost the pages trying to fix the camera, right? And Superboy Prime is from an Earth where all the superheroes.
Superboy Prime.
Yeah, he can read the comics, so he knows who all these people are. And the Legion had such esteem for what they stood for to be a part of it. You know, you became a Legion for life. You lived in the clubhouse. This was what you did all the time. You risked it and stuff, right? And Polar Boy is one of the characters that could not control his powers. He came from a planet where the sun hit so hot that the people there would emit, you know, coldness. Think Iceman, a whole race of Icemen, right? But he couldn't control his powers, so the Legion told him, come back when you learn, you know. So he was a reject, and a whole bunch of the rejects that the Legion didn't take became the Legion of Substitute Heroes. Well, time goes by. Polar Boy is now a member of the Legion of Superheroes, to the point that over the years he actually led the Legion there at one point. And now we have Superboy Prime, the Legion of Supervillains, Mordru. We got everything against them coming up to where Polar Boy, for reasons you have to read the story, is the last one standing. And he's got to give three teams and Superman time to do what they need to do. And Superboy Prime is just ripping people apart, and up comes Polar Boy. All right. And he's going to do it because he is Legion. he is going to do what he has to do because he is Legion. All right, daggone it. Right, and that's where you're like, oh shit, these are the stakes. So, Superboy Prime knows he's there. We know he's a killer. We know he rips people in half. He does this real life. It's not just fighting a super villain. We're fighting somebody who brings real life violence to our innocent little comics, if you will, right? And it's Polar Boy. And Polar Boy not only holds his own, but he gets his arm ripped off, right? And Superboy Prime is mocking him. You're a reject. You're nothing. You do this, right? And all of a sudden, Polar Boy does something he's never done before. He starts using his freezing powers to make a new arm.
Mm.
Yeah, much like I'm fighting this stream here, But anyway, so he makes a new arm and he says he's doing it. He's like, I'm not just a reject. I am Legion and I will do it. And he grows that arm and he grabs something he's supposed to have and he succeeds. It's the ultimate underground fight that you don't know how he was going to win. And he did not need to win. He's doing everything he can. He's getting the shit beat out of him by, here's where I'm going to go solo if you don't mind. Now that I found the pages. All right. So, he's already regrown his arm. He's yelling that he's Legion. He's defiant to the end. Superboy blasts that ring again. He goes for that ring. That Legion ring is a symbol. That is his American flag, if you will. That is everything, he is that he believes in. And this shows just why, like, Legion, not only that, but this shows why Legion has fans. He went all the way willing to sacrifice for what he believes. And he gets over him. Superboy Prime is yelling at him, beating the snot out of him. And he is freaking telling him off all the way to the freaking end. This is what the Legion and his beliefs has done for him. And he's going to die. It's over. And then all of a sudden, this is what it is about Legion. When you're Legion, you're never alone. They get there just in time to save him. And it's Sunboy, the person with the opposite powers. They should be opposites for everything that they are, but they are Legion, which is bigger than their differences. You know what I'm saying? And they all come in and they're telling Superboy Prime, you mess with one, you're messing with all of us. And then all of a sudden, that was what they were going for. Superboy of the DC universe has come back to life after dying in Final Crisis or Infinite Crisis or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we find out there's Superboy Prime of the future has joined also, right? But that's what I'm trying to get at. This is inspirational. This is about belief and fighting odds and not just backing down. And we are Legion. It's about being part of something bigger. So when it came down to one person, giving them time to do what they need to do, he did it for 3 teams and to bring somebody back to life and stuff like that. So it's all about sacrifice. How far are you able to go? What you believe in? Your humble beginnings, not defining who you are. I mean, there's a lot in there. These are things that make heroes. These are morality stories. You know what I mean? That's why I keep saying these are morality stories. You can see things in there of what still makes a hero. This was still when they were doing comic books that did that. Yes, they can be silly. Sometimes they can be romanticized and things like that. But that's the core basis of this. This is mythological stuff. This is David and Goliath. This is biblical stuff and everything that they're bringing through. These are the things that people read and they can get inspired or think in the back of their head. This is punk rock music for the little kid that gets picked on and hears that lyric. If somebody comes at me with aggression, come back at them with 3 times the aggression. You finish it. You don't start it. Things like that. You know what I mean? This is about being something more and having something bigger than what you are. And is it worth
remember
it? Yeah.
Johns did really good with that. You mentioned Superboy, Connor Kent, right? That's his name, right, Tim?
Pardon?
Is it Superboy is Connor Kent, right?
Yeah. He's a clone of. It started out as after the death of Superman. He was a clone of Superman. Jeff Johns made where he's a clone of Lex Luthor and Superman.
Johns did really good with him because when he first fights, Superboy Prime, he gets clobbered.
Right.
And he gets clobbered. He almost dies. And then he's saved by the Titans and with some help of Lex Luthor, if I remember correctly. And as he's recovering, he has this brief relationship with Cassie. Is it Cassandra? Is it Wonder Girl? The new Wonder World, Cassandra, and and so that's when, yeah, that crisis with those what is it the Omax and that
Yeah,
craziness, yeah, when the
Infinite Crisis. Yeah,
Infinite Crisis, and so he's recovering, and he basically, there's that wonderful moment with him and Cassie when he's recovered, and now he's going to go and you know not just help the Titans but everyone.
they
And
lost their virginity together. That's what they
that's
were
right.
alluding to, and it's
That's right.
they were underage, so they were tasteful.
That's right. And then he goes and he fights Prime again, and like Johns did here, he brings all the heroes arrive just in, well, not in time here, because basically Connor Kent sacrifices himself
Yeah,
in fighting Superboy Prime, and that's where he dies.
yeah.
But John's interesting how Johns was able to weave in his storyline to these major crises, you could say, um, and it's just impressive what Johns could do. It's like Johns could. He's like Marv Wolfman and Paul
Yeah.
Levitz, in one guy. What he could do with various characters, create these literally epic storylines,
Yeah.
and within a few years, I mean, just not just this, but we did with Green Lantern and everything else, right? Um, and again, I think about him, and I guess maybe even Chris Claremont, but more what Wolfman did with Titans for such
Oh
a
yeah.
long time. What
Yeah. Now
Levitt
that
did.
I did a recent reread of the Titans from the beginning. I
Mhm.
think I made it into the 30s with it, and I just realized I kind of abandoned it because I kind of know the stories. But Wolfman was putting it started out. Wolfman was very smart, but I don't know if it was by design or what he had to do. But
Yeah,
basically, it still read like a comic, a lot of dialogue, a lot of this, a lot of that, and slowly the mature themes came in.
mm,
Still a comic book. I mean, it was the first of its kind to really do this. I guess Frank Miller and Daredevil and the Titans were doing it at the same time. One was a bit more in your face than the other, but
yeah,
as the book went on, with the Titans were growing up, is what's going
yeah,
on. And by the time they got to the Baxter series, it caused a little bit of a commotion because when the big bad guy popped up, it showed Dick Grayson and Starfire in bed naked,
Fire in
waking
Bed.
up. But
I remember
but
that.
for La Raza, this is I have a video called my favorite or something, my top five, whatever, Legion of Superhero stories. This is a great place to start because when Superboy Prime
I
shows up
agree.
in the
It's a good place to start. Yeah.
yeah, he starts. Superboy Prime ends up at the Legion of Superheroes museum, and the computers tell him the history of the Legion and Superman and stuff. So you are the Superboy Prime is you exploring this future, so you'll know it catches you up. If you
Mhm.
decide to go with this, Larissa, this is just for you here, right? The first part of this story, you don't really need these, is the Lightning Saga from a few years earlier. And then Jeff Johns did this in Action Comics. We got part two of the trilogy, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. That doesn't really have a name. It's just from a run of his Legion stuff. It's collected. That kind of introduces you to the Substitute Legion and stuff. Um, yeah, I love when I get all this stuff out and then put it up after we're done and stuff. So yeah, the Legion, like I said, is Legion is very light to a certain extent, but man, they got darker in places than anywhere else, at the time. We're talking Justice League and stuff. I mean, they had teenagers getting maimed and killed, but
Yeah.
you didn't realize how heavy this was because it was a comic book in that Silver Age feel. But no, when you step back and look at them, there's some dark stuff in there.
I remember when Titans. I mean, you said the maturity in Titans. I mean, remember the Judas contract, right? The Judas contract, and where Robin basically grows out and becomes Nightwing. Oh yeah, there we go. And Tara, who's I think 16 years old, and
Smoking.
she's having a relationship with Slade, and but basically she's betraying everyone in the storyline, and then a Beast Boy who's in love with her, he can't accept it. He says no, Slade manipulated her, and he
Yeah.
goes, no, this is just her. This is the way she is. She's just a bad seed. And she admits it. She goes, I used you. That kiss meant nothing to me.
Yeah.
To remember that. And so it meant nothing to me, but Beast Boy just can't accept it. He can't.
Yeah.
He goes, no, she was manipulated. That didn't happen. But Tara's trying to tell him, no, this is who I am. Is you guys, you guys are pathetic. You don't use your powers when it's meant to be used. And that's what I liked about those. Yes, they were teens, as were the Legion. I guess they were young. But one, they were superheroes. They're not regular people. So as a kid, that I looked at it this way. And also, if you could put your life in danger, why can't you do other things that adults do, right? And I remember in recent years, I don't know, some YouTuber was upset about the relationship between Tara and Slade. But at the time, no, it made perfect sense. So what if she's 16 and he's in his 30s? One, she's a hero. Well, I guess she's a hero. She's a superpowered person in a sense, and also in this world. And also, if she can go and risk her life, why can't she have sex with an older man? It made no sense to me. All of us, it was never an issue. It never came up among my fellow Titan readers. The same with Kitty Pryde and her relationship with not Cyclops. What's his name? I forgot. It's Colossus. None of that, and it seems like it's not. This is the way it. This is the way it works here, and it's perfectly fine.
I think what we're touching on is it's just my take on this is you had Peter. You didn't have the Tara and Deathstroke thing. That's borderline. That's an older man with kids older than Tara. Tara was still a teen, right? But as you saw, Tara was not defined by being 16 in that book with her actions and the life she led. Does that make sense? No. Yeah. So we're not looking at your typical 16-year-old who's in her room and stuff, right? And
none of them are typical 16-year-olds. None of them
right,
are.
I'm getting that. And then we have Peter, then we have Colossus and Kitty Pryde, like what you're talking about. And Peter was just a little bit over 18. And I can't remember how old Kitty was, but we'll say 15 or 16 and stuff, right? And they did give you the idea that she lost her virginity to Peter. And Wolverine took him out when he cheated on her and dumped her and got his ass beat at Wolverine was going to beat his ass, but he ended up lucking up, and the Juggernaut was in a bar. And when the Juggernaut handed Peter his ass, Wolverine was like, that's how you made Kitty feel. You're like, yeah, I didn't do it, and all this stuff, right? So I think the biggest thing is there was repercussions. And I think they pointed out what you were saying, Kitty's out here fighting villains, putting her life on the line. Does that come with a certain amount of maturity that's added? They didn't make a big deal about it. I get how people see it was creepy when they look back on it, but you had to be there at that era and that time. It doesn't make it right, but it's not your typical situation. You know what I mean? It's the exception.
In elementary school, the girls in elementary school in 6th grade were dating middle schoolers. The middle school girls were dating the high school kids. The high school kids were dating kids out of university. And the only thing we were pissed off about from the boy point of view is, one, they're not dating us. They're dating these older guys. And second, if anything, we were concerned is Dad finds out, this is Texas, someone's going to get shot. And but it was never about that's creepy, that's weird. It was, one, just jealousy. Those girls were not going out with us; they're going out with older guys, and then the idea, just don't tell Dad. He's
well. I'll tell you what. I'll throw this out here since we're adults here, and then do you have another book to show? If not, we could probably do one.
We can jump into Cerebus because basically we're both on the same team with Cerebus.
Okay, yeah, we'll go ahead and do Cerebus, but that's what I'm talking about. But I might be oversharing here, but it's the internet. But I don't, my wife, I don't care. My wife. I had a thing about dating. I actually did not date that much. I had many opportunities. I had a girlfriend. Don't get me wrong. I had a girlfriend I saw on the weekends at the skating rink, and that was sort of enough. And then there were certain things to where, like, I hate to say, but I was just bored. I could never put my finger on what was wrong. You know what I mean? I'm like, I got my friends doing this. I've got my friends doing that. And then all of a sudden it kind of clicked. The life I led at home, I was not like other kids. Okay. I couldn't worry about going out and am I going to have the next trendy set of jackets that's coming out? I had to go home and like, what am I going home to? Are we going to have electricity? Is the stepdad going to be in a mood because he's out of pot? I had other things going on. You know what I mean? So what happened is it finally clicked when I was 17. I ended up going out with a 34-year-old woman, and it finally felt normal. So, okay.
No, I
Now,
did older women too, Tim. There's
that's what I'm
something
getting
about
at.
that. Yeah.
So I hit a thing where when I was, oh God, how was I? 19. By the time I was 20, I'd lived with 5 different girls at some point. 2 weeks
Yeah.
here, 3 weeks there. And then when I was 20, I lived with a 24-year-old for 9 months. So it was right. It felt right. It was
Yeah.
right for me. But I know friends of mine that they would have been like, ooh, a booby, and throw them a candy bar. They couldn't have handled it. Does that make sense? So I think when you realize we all don't grow up in the same situation, and certain things make some of us grow up real quick and we get robbed of a little bit. Yeah, it's a little bit different. You know what I mean? So nowadays, something like that happened, and it's Now we're not talking about people in positions of power like teachers and stuff.
That's a whole
It's
different
students.
thing. That's a
Yeah,
whole
that's not what we're talking about. So now that
No.
we made it completely, now that we've probably like blown some minds, and now we're going to go viral and stuff, let's get into Jaka's story. Okay.
Let me get some coffee quickly for Jaka. Do you mind?
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
be
go
right
ahead.
back.
So Jaka's story came out in 1990. For you guys that don't know about Cerebus, I mean, hold on tight, guys, right? So for you guys that don't know, 300 issue story of the life of one character, Cerebus, right? And Cerebus ended up being a barbarian, a mercenary, a tax collector. And then around issue 26, Dave Sim went a completely other way. And for at least 15 years, in my opinion, this book was so ahead of its time, it's unreal, because we got high society. And then we had him, we had Cerebus become a prime minister, and then he became a pope. And we talked about ascension, and he was like ruling over people and everything, and taxes, and some very interesting characters coming through here every month in the life of the story of a character. And the biggest thing that was going on with Cerebus is they were talking about the great ascension, where he would ascend, literally meet, I guess, God, and he, and all this stuff, and he would find out some secrets. Well, that all came true. We had Cerebus get married to Red Sophia for political reasons, and we saw him talking to the masses, and it was satire and other comic books, and sometimes it was funny, and sometimes it got real heavy. This book throughout the 80s was so far ahead of its time, and I can't remember, I believe I put this in a new comic book bag, right? So the thing with Cerebus, though, one of my favorite issues is issue 53, because this is just a slice of life story. This is the Duchess and the Aardvark. And this Duchess, who's very wealthy, is in love with Cerebus, and Cerebus is completely clueless. And he's invited to come stay with her, and he's going to write matters of government, and they were going to talk about things. And what happens is that Cerebus ends up walking through courtyards with her, and they ended up on this windowsill. This is going somewhere, right? They end up on this windowsill for just a page or two, and they're talking about their past and lost loves and old lovers and things like that, right? And this is the book that really freaked me out, because now that I've overshared on here and said a few things, I have actually been on a windowsill like that, with a place to sit in front of the windowsill and have that exact same conversation and be in this situation with someone who had feelings for me, and I had no idea. And then we ended up talking like that, and we ended up becoming very good friends. And we're going on very good friends for over like 30 years, right? So I was like, holy crap. So as the ascension went on, we ended up with this issue here that is in between Church and State and Jaka's story. I
overheard you, Tim. I heard you. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So with the ascension, we had Cerebus go up and ascend, right? And all of a sudden he meets the judge, who was sort of like the voice of God. I think he's on the moon, supposedly. And Cerebus learns to get to the point that maybe he shouldn't have done this ascension, because now he learns that when he dies, and Dave Sim already told us in real life that the 300th issue will be the death of the character, that Cerebus has found that he's going to die unloved, alone, and unmourned by anyone, right? He's got to deal with this, right? So back when we were used to having creators stay on a book for a lengthy amount of time, they would have huge arcs. And before they started a new arc of a story, you would get these issues in between as a breather to take a little break for the reader before they started again, right? And in issue 112 and 113, this is one issue that counts as two issues because of deadlines. We have Cerebus returning back to Earth, knowing that he's going to die unloved, unmourned, and everything. And he's going back to places where you had to read the book. There's a person that deleted themselves, and the body is still there. He finds his old he finds his old clothes that he didn't wear because he was Pope. He gets the vest and the sword and everything back. Everything he has taken off, and it's raining. And then he comes to a bridge, and the bridge is broken up. It's gone. So to me, that was symbolic of like the path in life you had is gone. And Cerebus is actually thinking about jumping off this bridge down into the chasm to end it because he just found out his fate. Anyway, he ends up walking around and stuff like that, and he ends up finding Jaka. So let's explain Jaka. Jaka is the only truly human, normal person in this wonderful series. Yeah. Jaka is the humanity, the thread that even when she's not mentioned in the book or talked about, she's always in the back of Cerebus's mind.
Yeah, always.
That's what keeps him angered and grounded. Yeah.
He's always a winner.
So after you read this book, I feel like you're going to be like, you might love Jaka too, or at least what we were saying, about Love and Rockets, the idea of Jaka. Jaka, jump in here anytime. I mean, you know how I get rolling, jump in here. But basically, Jaka grew up. This book, the story of Jaka did not end up marrying Cerebus at this time. Cerebus was in love with her. He ends up marrying Red Sophia, and he ends up having other women and things going on, right? But Jaka was the one. And when you after reading this whole crazy story and the satire and how everybody acts and everything like that, Jaka feels like the real person. Jaka is based on a real life love of Dave Sim. That's why she's sort of a dancer, a little bit young. And Cerebus wanders around at a bar, and Jaka invites him to live with her, and he meets Rick. Jaka's had a miscarriage. Rick is this real aloof dude who's like a writer and an artist, and he seems pretty fine with them living a very menial life, while Jaka is out trying to figure out how to make the money and stuff. This is real life stuff. This is slice of life stuff that I've seen over and over and over, right? At the same time, her dancing is outlawed by a very fascist regime at the time, based on religion and politics being mixed. Satanist, is that what they're called?
Yes, Satanist, yeah.
A lot of exposition, but we're almost
tavern dancing is forbidden.
Hang in there, right? So she's going out, and she's the one making the money to keep them up. Plus, she's invited Cerebus, who's in love with her, to stay with them. And meanwhile, at the pub, the only reason she's really in there dancing is the bartender loves her, is in love with her, and he's messed up. And then we have their neighbor, who was actually Oscar Wilde, being an unreliable narrator for us, writing the story of Jaka as it's going on with Jaka, Jaka and all them, right? So this is the story of a slice of life woman out there, and I think this is one of and Dave Sim is a controversial figure that just slides off my back. I read the entire thing. He has a mental illness. This is an artist working his way through. But I don't see, if you read this story, I think you actually see, despite having some bad choices in his life, this is probably one of the most honest. I've worked with women in social work since 1995. I'm actually, I'm not saying that I'm knowledgeable about women, but I have been around women being women constantly. The reality, hearing how they talk during lunches. I'm a house cat around them. You know what I mean? I've heard the stories and the divorces and the things they've done. I've heard the attention. I've heard the ones that are super dramatic and stuff like that, right? I feel like I have seen them at all ages and in most situations. I've seen the ones that make their own problems, and I've seen the ones that are Jaka. You follow what I'm saying? You cannot paint a broad brush, in my opinion, on what a woman is and her behavior and her choices. You know what I'm saying? So when we look at Jaka here, I feel like this is a great story of a person, of Jaka. You know what I mean? Go ahead. I've gone on and on. I'm losing my train of thought a little bit.
Now, for the same thing with Tim, when I read Cerebus, it was in the mid '80s, and when I picked up it was a copy. I think Cerebus was already I think he was the Pope, and no, he wasn't the Pope yet. He was climbing up some mountain, I remember, and I remember the artwork just struck me by Dave Sim and Gerhardt, and I was just amazed by this artwork. I had no idea what came before the storyline that I picked up. But I was just enchanted by the artwork, and I tried to make sense of the story because, again, I had no prior knowledge of the story. But when Jaka's story dropped, that changed absolutely everything. And like Tim mentioned earlier, I think if you're going to begin with Cerebus, just read Jaka's story. You don't have to know anything that happens before that. You don't have to know anything that happens afterwards. Because Jaka, I think, is Dave Sim's maybe greatest creation, even beyond
Yeah.
Cerebus. Because as much criticism and much of it he brought on his own because of his diatribes in the comics that he would write, right, against feminism and all these things, is Jaka, though. He can have his viewpoints on feminism and on women in his diatribes, but when you look at Jaka, not only is she a sympathetic character, I mean, she comes across this and she puts basically the men in their place, and she reveals things about men, about us, which are not very positive at all.
There we go. Yeah, the balance. It's a balance.
A balance of it. What he was able to do with whatever views, something would be really odd. You'll read his diatribes or response in the letters to people, and then you read the comic, and it would be, is this the same person? It would be like when I used to read the Wall Street Journal, you had the op-ed pieces, which was talking about deregulation, and then when deregulation, anti-communism, all these things, free enterprise, trickle-down economics, while they're good for the economy. But then if you read the actual news stories in the Wall Street Journal about white-collar crime, companies polluting, you're thinking, do the editors read their own stories? It's almost like complete opposite of what they're saying here. Why you need deregulation? Well, their stories are talking about Wall Street corruption and everything, right? Then even back to Jaka. Jaka comes from a privileged background. Her uncle is Julius. She grew up with governesses. She grew up with all these things, but she rejected this early on. Not on some class issue, but she wants to live her life. She wants to dance. She does not want to depend on her family. She goes her own way, and she becomes basically a tavern dancer, which is rather embarrassing given her privileged background. And that's where she meets Cerebus in issue number 6. And at first, she sees him like a little boy, but he begins to share his stories, his adventures to her. And she's enthralled by him. And then he says a line, something about, I will kill a yaka for you, some kind of animal for you for dinner, which is an interesting line in issue number 6, because that line will later come back in this wonderful story called The Night Before. Because what ends up happening here, those of you, is Jaka appears in issue number 6 and then she disappears.
Yeah.
Now, Cerebus, when you read the book, you'll be reading and you're thinking, where's Jaka? And then there'll be like a sentence where he's thinking about her. That's why Cerebus is like a novel. You have to read it very closely. And then you keep thinking, when is she going to appear again? And she doesn't appear until basically 30 issues later, which is a few years later in real time, in The Night Before. So, and if, like, I'll discuss this issue later if you like, but certainly with Jaka, what she has is she is the love of Cerebus's life. And she loves him. But like Tim alluded to there, she ends up getting married to Rick.
Yeah.
And then that storyline in Jaga's story is just it's their relationship, how he treats it, and you've seen from various points of view, but certainly Jaka comes across as the most humane of the characters, and the other characters they have their faults too, but you know, the men don't come across very well in this, and now Jaka's not perfect, no, not at all. We
And that's
see
the
it
thing.
all,
I don't mean to butt in there, but the men not coming across in this,
yeah.
we see the story. It's in story. This isn't
Bingo. That's what it is.
down
Yeah,
men.
that's what
These
I
are
meant. It's not
real.
didactic. It's not
Yeah.
didactic at all. Not at
Yeah,
all.
it's not misandry. It's these. I feel like these are slices of life. I don't know if Dave Sim has seen these people, seen these situations, been these people, heard stories, but that's one of the reasons I love it because these people feel real. I can point to people in my life that would be Rick in a relationship, not Rick the character, but how he is in this. The bartender, I can point to people who I cannot stand a man who goes from his mother straight to a wife and expects a wife to be a mother. That's what I'm trying to
Yeah,
get at. These traits are
that's
real.
dangerous. That's
Yeah,
dangerous
these
territory.
yeah,
Yeah,
these people are real faults. And then we've seen the men, I've seen the men, the women, areas in our lives, my life, where you seem to be a magnet for attracting the wrong people. And that's where
absolutely.
it feels like Jaka is now. Yet Jaka is not elevated to where she's on a pedestal here. Jaka will show that
Right.
she's made some bad decisions. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, but
I'm sorry.
continue, Tim. What pages are you showing there? That's why I see Rick right over there.
Yeah. So Jaka starts at the prologue is 114. And to get to know what, and I just, that's what I was saying. I was showing the pages while you talked because we have a sort of a prose where we go back and forth. This is the present. This prose is the past where we get to know Jaka. The reader's getting caught up. She had a nanny. She was sort of alone. She didn't, even though she had a life of privilege, we see the nanny, which is this is important, as her
Those are
doll.
beautiful pages. Beautiful
Yeah.
pages.
As you read this, you'll be like, what are these art choices? Here's the real life nanny holding on to Jaka as a child, but we have the head of her doll, Missy. Well, that's kind of because it's open interpretation. Uh, was Missy just might as well have been a doll? She wasn't really that close to her. This is how her memory works. Her security was her doll. Was that the nanny? How she sees her? And then we're back in the present to where she is a woman. I have lived with people and been married to where this is a familiar scene. One of the greatest things I think is the most beautiful is the first thing that happens is when a woman wakes up, the sun is shining through a window and she is stretching or getting dressed, and we're right there. This is slice of life in humble beginnings with Rick, and we get to meet Rick. What is wild is Rick ends up being I think he's the only character ends up going to heaven by the end of this. All the characters we see kind of end up in hell. Uh-oh. We have lost Gore, so I'll continue, right? So you see they have humble beginnings. Rick goes on saying that he's hunting for a job and they need money in these times. And Rick really isn't out there looking for a job. He is kind of content having Jaka go out and do her illegal dancing. And it's not even stripping, illegal dancing to keep them up. Meanwhile, we learn more about Jaka as a human with his prose, and you take care of it. Like I said, this is when you would get a comic book, and it would probably last you a month. This was meant to last a month, if you will, right? So anyway, as we go forward here and everything like that, Jaka kind of is a little bit, oh man, this is a mess. She sees her doll and she's probably remembering things, right? So we have emotion and emoting and ways that we're supposed to maybe interpret this stuff, right? So she runs into Cerebus. He is back.
Moment there.
There we go.
I
You're
lost
back.
connection for some reason. I'm sorry, Tim.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay.
But we just got through the prologue, but I don't
Yeah.
want to go page by page, but she ends up at one of the bars. I'm trying to find it. And she finds Cerebus there drinking. And she more or less invites Cerebus to come live with her, she and Rick. She lets him know she had a miscarriage. And Cerebus is in love with her. Um, and like I said, I mean, the payoff is so well. When you read this, you kind of experience it
You can
as,
go to just show your page. People can see the page, Tim.
oh, okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Please do. Those are beautiful, stunning pages. Look at that.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, with Gerard would actually make models of these buildings and rooms for reference, right? And then we have, what is his name? Pud?
I don't
We have
remember this guy's name. No, he's a rather pathetic character.
Yeah. So we have Pud. We'll call him Pud. It
Yeah,
matches.
Bud. Yeah.
But anyway, he's in love with Jaka, and he hires Jaka and pays her, even though her dancing really isn't bringing anybody in, and he can get
No,
major.
no one ever shows up.
Right. And they just keep dancing. She keeps coming in, and Cerebus happens to be in the bar. Now, what's wild is I don't know if we're there yet, but Cerebus, about 95 issues or 85 issues or something, spends years in a bar. Once you go into a bar, the government has set it up where you don't pay for drinks and you are immune in there. It's sanctuary, but you can't leave. Once you leave, you can be arrested if you're wanted. And that's just a way of controlling people with alcohol and stuff, right? So anyway, Cerebus is in there. He's come down from the Ascension. He doesn't know which direction he's going to go. And this guy's in love with Jaka. And I'm just going to get to the point. When he talks about Jaka, he's comparing her to his virtuous mother. Okay.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, his virtuous mother. So this is one of those men that goes, they don't understand that a wife and a mother are two separate things. That's not a man. That's actually the only type of man I do judge is someone that goes straight from a mother to a wife and expects a wife to be a mother. You know.
But also, Tim, that what he does with this character, it's subtle, but basically it's when you have repressed sexual desire.
Yes.
It could lead not just to perversion, but to sadism. And he addresses that with this character. It's in the writing and how he shows it. It's not just us interpreting it that way.
Right.
I mean, that's why Sim is such a good writer. He addressed that issue there. And
he shows it. He doesn't tell it.
He does. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, exactly. That's what I'm saying. This is what I'm trying to get at. This is very balanced, in my opinion. You know, these are characters I know. I've run across people like this. You know. So anyway, she had a horse as she was a kid that she had a big imagination. There's something about this wooden horse that had a name, but she gave it another name, showing her kind of defiance in her imagination. There's just so many things in here that makes you feel for Jaka. And that's what I'm trying to tell you. She's the most human in this. So here she is having meager means out here on the streets doing illegal dance. And we're just talking dancing, not stripping. Yeah, and she invites Cerebus to come and stay with her. Meanwhile, we have several unreliable narrators that kind of go with this. We're seeing points of view and people talking about what's going through their head and everything, right? And like I said, she's had a miscarriage. And then we kind of get the thing about a tortured lover. Cerebus is always kind of trying to stay to himself, but he can hear Rick. He doesn't like Rick. And then he ends up liking Rick. Like, damn it, I don't want to like Rick. Because as he goes...
his rival.
Yeah, and when he goes to bed at night, he can hear them having sex.
Yes, that's tough.
Yeah.
Very tough to do, yeah.
That's what I mean. I wish I knew the particular issues off my head. We'll just skip ahead to part 6 here, you know, where Cerebus is in the loft and all this stuff. But we finally actually get to see Jaka dance. That's what I really hope I can find here because it's unusual.
There's Oscar Wilde there, or a version. That's something that's going to recur with him, is basically using either fictional characters from comics or novels, from Elric to Wolverine, Moonroach, whatever, to the Rolling Stones, to Norman Mailer, Pierce, to Hemingway, to Fitzgerald. But here it's Oscar Wilde.
Yeah. They have fights also.
Yeah.
And you get the idea it's because she is the breadwinner, and every now and then he's expected to be.
Yeah, he can't find a job. He can't secure anything.
So, yeah, and I don't know how many times I've seen that over the years where the man doesn't feel like a man. So when the woman does it, yeah, I mean, this stuff really
he addresses that too in the comic. Yeah. That's just it. He addresses all these things so well.
And the whole time, Cerebus is just watching like we're watching. Yeah, this is not a Cerebus story. He's there. And we just keep learning more and more about her past as we're catching up with the present, and we have Pud watching her. And these panels get creepier and creepier with the way he looks at her.
They do.
and he's talking about how like we're not bringing any customers, but I can still. He's just paying her to make sure she comes back, and we finally get to see how she dances, and it's very gypsy-like and ballerina-like more than anything. Meanwhile,
There's an
Sarah's
issue. Yeah, there's a single issue, and if you have it there, where you actually show where she's actually in her dress, in her garb,
yeah,
her dancing garb. It's a really pretty picture.
yeah. So, like I said, the panel work, the novel work, you take your time through this, and you just get more and more immersed. And then here we come with your character here. I can't remember his name, but it's Oscar Wilde. That's why I
Yeah,
can't
I
remember.
just thought it was Wilde, Oscar Wilde.
Yeah.
Basically.
And is he gay in this?
I don't think his sexuality is an issue.
Right.
Becomes something in the story. But Oscar Wilde in real life was gay.
But he is our narrator.
He is a narrator.
In
Yeah.
this. So you actually have 2 or 3 narrators. You have us seeing through Sarah's eyes, and as we're watching, you have Pud, who's just kind of warped, and then you have Oscar Wilde. Which I can't think of his name in this.
Well, let me say something. I think what Sim starts to do here is he reads biographies about these writers. He reads their major works. And I think with Wilde, he begins to imitate his prose when he's writing the story about Jocka. Now, he's going to do that when he does a story where Fitzgerald appears, and then when Hemingway appears. And because in those back issues, he talks about everything that he's reading, biographies and books and books by the writers. And I think there's something, I mean, the effort of this that he put into this, literally, he dedicated his life the way he did this. I don't think he had any social time, really.
Right.
Because, I mean, and this is one of the other brilliant aspects of this comic, of this brilliant North American comic by a great Canadian writer, that it's just, I think it's very unique in comics, I think.
Right. And the other thing is that, we're showing you the pages to bait you in, and you're seeing the structure of all this stuff. You're not going to get the magic of the story unless you read it,
Right.
God, introspective, personal. I don't know. I mean, look at this, the moods, the psychology of his art,
Yeah, like Jaime Hernandez, he can do a lot with one panel. He's actually even better than Jaime. He's just on another level, I think. And again, with Gerhardt, his collaborator.
Yeah. Oh my, so much was so little. And then we kind of get reminded that, Cerebus is around. So,
if I may interject him.
Yeah.
Okay, before we get to this, I'd mentioned before, she appears in issue 6, disappears from his life. And in a way, throughout those 300 issues, she's like Laura in Dr. Zhivago. If you've seen the movie or the miniseries or read the book, I've seen the film, I've seen the miniseries, I've read the book. If Laura is Zhivago's love of his life, but she appears just through different stages in the story. And every time the reader, the Zhivago goes through a lot, and you keep thinking, when is she going to appear again? When is she going to appear again? And then she comes into his life and leaves his life. This is exactly what Dave Sim does with Jocka. So she disappears and then reappears with issue number 36. Oh, there's the one. There's the one I was talking about, issue 11. Anyway, I'll pause. I'll let you show this one. This is a wonderful.
Oh, keep talking. I'll just show the pages. Like I said, it's got to be over a decade since I've read this.
Okay. Well, what happened is issue 36 is that at this point, now Cerebus, to mind you, when we first meet him, all he cares is about gold, right?
Right.
And basically drinking. And he's got no purpose in his life beyond this. But then when he gets the opportunity to become prime minister, and he gets basically involved with upper society, he goes for it. Now, in issue 36, Jocka reappears in his life. And when she appears, she's got a gift for him. That's a very special gift for him. Now, at this point, this issue is a very powerful issue, I think, issue 36, because when she is there, he's very demeaning towards her. He says, now that you're here, you're probably here because you're a freeloader. You're here because I'm moving up. You're here for all these things. But he goes, I'll take you in anyway, something. And all this time, you see her expression on her face. And then as she says, basically, I made some investment. Oh, you probably got swindled. Well, I bought something. Well, you shouldn't have bought that. And she goes, maybe you made a mistake. She goes, yeah, maybe I did make a mistake. Um, and but she's not there for a handout. She's not there for any of that. What she's there is for him. And in earlier issues, he had lost his sword. And what she's talking about his what she spent her last money on is that she bought that sword for him again. And it's wrapped up in a package. And he doesn't see that till the end of the story. After he's questioned why she's there. And she just walks away from him. Not walks away from him, but she's just torn. I mean, she's just devastated by the way she's been treated. But she doesn't get angry at him. She just says, and she even says that line, you once promised me you would basically kill some animal for me. And he doesn't remember that.
Right.
But that's like how love is, right? It's like, you talk about these romantic things, but then from her point of view, maybe he never loved me.
Yeah.
Remembered that.
Was it just pillow talk? Was it just talk to try to get something? Yeah.
No, well, with him, no, I think he did mean it. And maybe it's not possible. And I'll show the pages when we get there, but it's just so well done. And when she disappears from his life to reappear again later on when he is in power, and she's there to warn him that they're going to kill him, and she wants him to run away with him. And he doesn't want to. And at one point he hits her. He physically hits her.
Yeah.
Slaps her in the face.
Yes.
And then when she finally leaves him, this is all before Jaka's story. When she is, when he's about, now he's become the Pope. He's become the Pope. He's no longer, his marriage with Sophia, he's dissolved it. Well, she's left him, but she's dissolved it. And he wants to see Jaka again. And when Jaka appears, because he has her summoned, she discovers that she's married. But then he wants to dissolve her marriage.
Right.
And she says, and he says, he goes, admit it, you would love me. He goes, yes, I do love you, but I'm already married. And then he discovers that she's pregnant. But he's willing to give up everything to go with her. But she goes, I can't. I'm married and I'm pregnant. And at least this man, Rick, he's there for me. You're not. And this is all stuff leading to Jaka's story.
There was a preview of From Hell in here by Alan Moore. So yeah,
I saw that.
Yeah, but here's where I think, if I remember right, it splits. The story splits. So we've had the exposition. We've seen Cerebus end up liking Rick. Kind of budding up and being tortured, and we have Jaka still out here doing her thing, and we're getting to know her through the flashbacks, and we know our cast of characters and stuff. But I think, if I remember, when we finally see Jaka dance, well, then we have the catalyst that comes in, and all things go to hell, where they're all busted for her illegal dancing. That's going on. Oh, what's going on? Yeah, and this guy comes in, and he's all like some drunk. It's like
a lot of drunks in these comics. Yeah, he's really good with the drunks.
Yeah. Well, that's not it. But anyway, we see Jaka dance at some point finally, and that's when all hell breaks loose. I think we need to get to the point, I guess, here. And everybody, the fascist regime of the Syrianists come in. They're like a government mixed with religion and stuff. Comes in, and they get her. They put her in a cell, and we have a little. Oh, here we go. I bet this is where she dances finally.
Might be it, yeah.
And then here's the kicked-in door. So this is where the catalyst comes in. The Syrianists come and get her. They come after they come after everybody. But this is what I'm saying. The fact that he pulled off motion and a dance in a comic book. I mean, it worked. I mean, that's just he's a master craftsman.
And for the reader, Cerebus isn't there when they come to arrest her. Cerebus is not there.
But like I said, we see all the characters with their exposition. The sun comes up. She's remembering her aristocratic life. I'm trying to get to the point here. I swear there's a part where she dances. Am I imagining? Oh, here we
Yeah,
go.
I know. I remember that part too. I don't know which
Yeah.
issue it is in there though.
I think this is some of it. So we finally get to watch her
Oh, there's some of
dance,
it
and
there.
everybody's mesmerized. Even the drunk spits his drink out, and he's like wahoo and stuff. But I mean, it's just it's wild. It's wild how Sim puts this off because it actually looks like she's dancing, not a static figure, not just a couple of panels of awkward motions. There's a grace there. Her hair is flowing. I mean, you really cannot rush through this book. And it gets more intimate to where she's actually looking. This is the panel I remember. She's looking you, the reader. She's looking right at you. That's probably the magic. He understood the psychology of art to where if you want to connect with the viewer, have them make eye contact. That one little eye framed brings your eye to where she feels real. That's what I'm trying to get at. And Rick's being Rick, a goofball and everything. And then that's where everything, if I remember right, goes to hell. The Sirnists come in, they arrest Jaka. She's in a dungeon.
Yeah,
And then they
these are
have a
tough
little
pages.
they have a little V from Vendetta there where the nurse or the nurse that we showed at the very beginning of the prologue that didn't have
Yes.
a head, it was the doll. There's a lady in the next dungeon talking to her, claiming to be her old nurse.
Oh, that's right. That is
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
So there's a lot going on where, like, due to her upbringing and her ties to Lord Julius and all this stuff, that feels like it's playing into this. That's why we can't show every nonce. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this
And
is
as
a
you
tough. This is
see,
Jaka's story. It's just tough to read at this point. I
right,
mean, in an
and
interesting way, but now the story takes a much more somber tone.
yeah. So here you are getting to know Jaka and see how she's sort of self-sacrificing, and there's some crime or something they're coming after her for, and they break her. She gets broken, but what really breaks her is when they bring Rick in and things. And you were talking about Cerebus hitting her and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out it wasn't a miscarriage. She killed their baby. We'll just put it that way. And Rick ends up hitting her. And it's so wild how she sort of survives being in the dungeon and all the things they're wanting her to admit to. And what really gets her is losing Rick. I'm oversimplifying some of this, but it's been 10 years since I've read it. And then we had to have an epilogue to where things got lightened up with a funny story here. A bunch of Groucho Marx is running around, a lot of Lord Julius is running around, lookalikes, like-a-looks. And then we get a second epilogue and stuff. To review this book and not ruin the endings and the nuances and showing you all the emotional stuff, I can't recommend getting this and just reading it yourself. It's one of those books. And I'm sure there's all kinds of videos on YouTube that'll do it for you, if you want to go that way with it. Yeah.
There's a wonderful page, I think, in that final issue of the epilogue. And yeah, I won't spoil it for people. And you see it, the image just stays with you, it stays with me. But basically is you're going to have her disappearing from his life again.
Yeah.
Like it does in Dr. Zhivago. She'll be gone from his life. But in the background, every once in a while, he'll say a line about Jaka. He'll say something, or someone will say something about Jaka, and he doesn't hear who says it. But the reader goes, hey, it's Jaka. So she's always ever present in the storyline. Now, the issue I mentioned, issue 36, when she reappears after being gone from issue 6, is she appears here with him. And now he's on the road to becoming prime minister, on the road to power. Now, these pages, I think, all done by Dave Sim. This is all before Gerhardt comes in to help him. And they're having a conversation. That's when he's being rather demeaning, that he thinks she's there just to ask something from him, which is far from it. And the reader gets that. And the way she talks is... I get to the final part where, let's see, show you here. Okay, let me show you these pages there. You see there? She's about to leave. And she goes, I'm afraid I have to leave now. He goes, but you're broke. Where will you go? What will you do? And she says, I've taken care of myself since I was 12. I'll manage.
Right.
And then Cerebus says, at least let Cerebus give you some money to tide you over. And she says, no. As a matter of fact, I want to give you something. It's in that package next to you. I'll leave it you to decide whether it was a bad investment. Now, that's basically after he says early on in the story is you made a bad investment thinking that she messed up her money. But she's thinking about maybe it is a bad investment because she took her life savings to buy back the sword, his beloved sword that he had lost.
Yeah, his identity is what I think that was symbolic of. I mean, there's symbolism in this.
And he realizes he was an absolute jerk.
Yeah.
Total jerk. So then she disappeared from his life then. And then in issue 48, which is this issue here, she reappears again. Now, at this point, there's like wars taking place, and Jaka shows up unexpectedly. And she is there to warn him. She said, I grew up with these people. I mean, she comes from the aristocracy. They're just using you as prime minister. A war's about to take place, and you're going to be killed. And she says, come with me. And she goes, that's him already dressed up as prime minister. She goes, why are you doing this? And she says, because I want you to live. Because I want to be with you. I want us to leave now. And she tells him, I love you. This patch is there. And she says, this is such a waste of time. She goes, you're going to be here when they break down the door. No one will call you a coward if you leave. And she keeps telling him the truth. That's why he can't stand the truth. That's why he hits her. He can't stand it. She goes, just come with me. He goes, stop it, Jaka, stop it. And he strikes her. And then he says, I'm sorry. And she says, don't apologize. I understand. She goes, I have to leave. I'm sorry. And she walks out of his life. Well, for issue 48. And then by issue 75, when he's now Pope, and he has her summoned after breaking.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
She shows up. That's issue number 74.
We're in Church and State now. Yeah.
Church and State. He wants her summoned, but he doesn't know that she's married. And when she shows up, she's married. And he's pissed off. And he goes, I'm the Pope. I can have your marriage dissolved. And what does she tell them? Let's see. He's angry with her because she was supposed to wait for him. And she says, look at that part there.
Yeah.
She says, I said I would wait forever for you to remember. Well, you did remember, she says, and you never came back. You never came back for her. And now we get to the issue number 6. She goes, when I first met you that night, when you walked up to me, I thought you were a little boy. I was using a fake northern accent. I thought you were the cutest thing I ever saw. I thought you were imitating me, trying to copy my speech. You wanted to give me everything. I listened to you for hours, and I thought he wants to share his life. All of these people and places that I only dreamt about, he wants to share them with me. And it's me he wants to share them with. And then Cerebus says, I still want to share them with you. And then silence. And his last words were, I still want to share them with you. She says, your life is very different now. Your power and influence is almost unimaginable. They're calling you the savior, the way they called my uncle savior of Pono. I love my uncle, but I won't want to live that life again. I mean, she's rejecting the way she lived. She goes, the power changed him, her uncle. changed something vital inside him. Everyone I knew was changed when I was a little girl. And it's the reason I left. I don't know them anymore. They don't know me. And that's when he says, stop. That's when Cerebus has an epiphany. He lets go of his robe, and he's back to his old self.
Yeah.
His old garb. But the way the story ends is that when she tells him that, he says, let's go, Sarah, let's go. It's June night, let's go. And she goes, I can't. And he goes, I can still dissolve your marriage. And that's when she tells him, I'm pregnant. She goes, I won't tell you that I love him, meaning Rick. He's good to me. I can rely on him. And Cerebus says, you don't love him. You love Cerebus. And she says, you may be right. It doesn't matter. It can't matter. Because I'm going to have his baby in a few months. And breaks down. Because it's too late for them. It's too late for them now. Because she feels a responsibility towards Rick. Because she's pregnant with his child. And Cerebus, not understands it, but he has to accept it. He doesn't get angry. And they show these wonderful moments together. Silence. And then he goes, okay, before you leave, wait right there. It's like a little boy, the way he describes it. Right there. Don't move. Don't move. Don't move. Here, Jaka. It's for you. It's money. And she says, no, if I want money, I can always get it from Uncle Julius, but I'm going to manage on my own, as we see later on when she's a tavern dancer.
Yeah.
And then, like that, she walks out of his life. Look at those panels as he watches her walk away.
Yeah.
Look at those beautiful images there. And look at this beautiful image at the end.
Yeah, he had Jaka's story all. He had that all planned out. He knew exactly where he was going and where and when.
Yeah.
Oh,
beautiful stuff. Yes, absolutely beautiful stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, the experience of Cerebus. It's great to be able to see that you have all 300 issues in some way, shape, or form available to you. But I understand how that's if it can feel overwhelming, to jump in there and dive in there. So Jaka's story is actually, I think, the best human story in there. Yeah. And then Church and State is probably the best of the storytelling in there. But the seeds are all spread out, like that, what you just shown there about Jaka announcing that she was pregnant, her hair was short, so that when Jaka pops up and her hair is long, you automatically know time has went by. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. It's just the little, just so much of it just needs to be read. You just need to jump in there. But I would say Jaka's story is the one that maybe decide to try to read the whole thing. That's the one that grabbed me.
It really is really when you get to those points with when they reunite later on, and things look like they're good, and then they meet again the Fitzgerald character, and but anyway, that's all I'll say about that. But I mean, regarding Jaka's story, it's a good way to begin with Cerebus. I mean, because you really get homed in, you really makes you. Let me put it this way: if you read Jaka's story, then you enjoy what came before that and one came afterwards, right?
Yeah.
If you don't enjoy Jaka's story, then you're not going to like Cerebus at all, in my opinion. Although maybe Church and State, which is more political, it's very more political story. Maybe you like that. You don't like the love story element of it, which is understandable. But I would still say begin with Jaka's story.
The fact that
part of the story.
The fact that Cerebus is actually in it so little, and
that's right.
Exactly
he is. That's right.
Yeah, it's almost like we're sitting back with him watching all this with
that's
some
true.
unrivaled narrators and stuff,
that's
right?
True.
But like I said, the characters they're so, I don't want to say flawed, but where they're not they're not cookie cutter. They are complicated characters, even if they don't appear that with what we've shown. You know what I mean? Like they're not all bad, they're not all good. And then we see that everybody has something wrong. Jaka's very bad decisions come back to haunt her, you
But
know.
she still keeps her dignity. She's a very dignified character.
Right. They're human. Jaka's the most human character throughout all of Cerebus, you
I
know.
think in comics, I think in at least our North American comics, the way
Right.
he has her, she's extremely memorable. And yeah, it's just a remarkable creation by Dave Sim.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I'm kind of glad we did this and stuff. I'm kind of due for I think I'm gonna read those last couple pages and stuff because there's parts of this I remember like yesterday. And then there's like little gaps. I want to read the where she's in the dungeon. I need to read a little bit more in the dungeon, exactly what they were wanting from her, and try to figure out if that nanny was really her nanny
No, the nurse.
or if it was just somebody they planted in there to try to get in her head.
They would do that. I mean, I know
Yeah.
they would do that. Yeah, they would.
They never tell you though. They never tell you, but that's what I'm saying. I'm starting to remember. The darker the story got, the more you were just sort of like, "Oh no, not Jaka." And then when Rick finds out that she got rid of the baby, you're just like, "Oh my god!" It makes everything else right before that seem inconsequential for a minute that she just went through. This was the worst thing that could happen to her, you know. But I just remember cracking up when Service was starting to realize he actually kind of liked Rick, and she was flipping out that they were hanging out. And,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
yeah. That's what I mean. I think it's just a documentation. There's things in there that just make it feel real despite the setting that it's in, you know. And I think there isn't a level of maturity you have to really enjoy the nuances. You know what I mean? The what's going on here. I don't know what kind of we've heard of things about Sim's wedding and the girl that he dated and all that stuff, the dancer he was in love with and everything when he was getting married and stuff. But I would love to know where he got this. I don't know. My mind's going everywhere revisiting this stuff, man. Like I thought Terry Moore, Strangers in Paradise, had a lot of little slices of life in this, but this blows those away, you know. These just seem a bit more real, impactful. You know what I mean? There's a heaviness to them, you know. And depending how, I don't know. I think like I said, depending on your maturity and how much life you lived, I think there's parts of Cerebus here and there where I'm just sort of like, oh, I've been there. I've seen this. I've seen other people do this. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I have been Cerebus in this story watching. Plus, I have also been a little bit of Cerebus sitting in that room. Yeah. Listening to the girl he loves, you know what I mean? Like doing things with the guy that she loves, you know, the unrequited love, the Charlie Brown and the little redheaded girl, you know, dialed up, you know, to 20 and stuff, you know. So yeah, there you go. You know, the emotional stakes may have a bit more to do than the life and death stakes of your average comic, you know.
But these are not average comics. That's the thing. I think the books we discussed, the books I discussed, are not. I guess when people think of comics, they don't think of, oh, you can do that with comics. Yeah, they've been doing that for a long time. Yeah. And these are not anomalies. There's a lot of stories like this. You know, I mentioned earlier the Judas Contract by Wolfman and Bettis. You know, yeah, it's the Teen Titans. It's a kid it's a book that mostly people read that were kids, age 12, 10, 9, maybe 14. And yet, you know, it has a certain maturity. Yeah. You know, and but still, it's not going to be something that people who are unfamiliar with the medium or have certain biases or prejudice against the medium saying, well, it's still not going to be, you know, Casablanca,
right?
You know, or it's not going to be Dr. Zhivago. And I'm thinking, no, it's not. It's a comic, and it does it differently, but it does it as brilliant as Casablanca.
I think from issue 26. No, yeah, well, just to keep it, the beginning of High Society, all the way to the end of Melmoth, at least 125 issues there. Dave Sim was so ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I really think that's the frame. And what's ironic is when you get up to, is it Girls, Guys, Reads? I'm trying to think. I think it's not Guys. But anyway, there's one where he does the Neil Gaiman parody.
Yeah.
that's where comics caught up with Sim. I've always thought, now that we look back at it in 2020 hindsight, that by the early 90s, when Sandman was really taking off, despite
Yeah.
starting in the 80s, when Sim gets to do his satire and his parody of Dream and Death and the game and stuff, um, that's when that's when everything, where comics caught up with Cerebus. I think that's the actual place where everything had caught up.
I hadn't
Indies
thought about it
were,
that way, Tim. I think you're right. I think
yeah,
you're right. Yeah.
yeah. This is the history and the stuff of comics that I'm interested. I'm in that point of my collecting. That's what I'm interested in. What were the highs and lows? Where did we peak and go down, and what happened and stuff? Because nobody's putting out quality books and stories like this consistently anymore. This stuff was ahead of its time. The people who knew, and then in the '90s with that Serapis Zero, a lot of people woke up to Cerebus all over again, a whole new generation, thanks to Spawn. When Cerebus popped up in Spawn number 10, Todd McFarlane Spawn number 10, Dave Sims said more people saw Cerebus in that 1 month than they saw in,
That's
well,
true.
whatever it was, 17 years or whatever it
That's
was
true.
at the time. Yeah. So that's what I mean. Cerebus definitely got a second life in the 90s. It was sort of like the people who were into comics, people who made comics were into Cerebus.
Yeah.
The Marvel parodies and the Jim Shooters and the things that he had to say in Church and State. And I think it was really into the '90s when I could just, it's sort of like a feeling of like, hey man, I've been into Cerebus for a while. Then you see all these new people coming in claiming they were Cerebus fans to begin with. I can just imagine, you know what I mean? Like, oh man, really? When something gets trendy, you have everybody coming out of the woodwork act like they were always there. I had I don't care if he's watching. I had a friend named Joe Silcox who was like that. I've known these people in real life. Thus, I try to make sure I say when I got into something or where was my first exposure, because I cannot stand that.
Cerebus is going to suffer something. Okay, we mentioned Love and Rockets before, that it's not attracting younger readers. Love and
Oh yeah,
Rockets, not in a significant way. That to keep it sustainable. Cerebus is even more of a niche, but the thing with Cerebus though is either one, your literacy. You have to be basically your reading. If you have issues with reading, either from attention deficit or other issues, it's going to be a challenge because it's a book that's, it's not that just it's heavy in words. You have to pay attention to the language very carefully.
yeah.
Now, if you're a good reader, it's not an issue. But if you struggle through the reading, it's going to be a problem. Now, that can be overcome if you're just like me when I was a kid, when I read Cerebus. It was over my head, and my reading wasn't where it should be. But I was so intrigued by this story. My curiosity was so high, and I was so enchanted by this artwork, amazed that this could be done on a page. It made the struggle worthwhile. And I didn't see it as a struggle, and I persevered with it. In the same way, when I started to read novels, especially novels from the 19th century, and I had no knowledge of that period, had no knowledge of where these novels were coming from, but I was interested in it. So if you have readers like that, they'll go for Cerebus. But even if you have people who have the curiosity, is the issue of the literacy is going to be a problem for this book. And then also, since he doesn't make it easy for the reader, he'll reference something like I mentioned, the Jaka thing, where she'll disappear from his life. But if you don't read it carefully, she does appear in a sentence or two. And then you're thinking, okay, he's doing this on purpose. And then when characters appear, he's not going to reference where they appeared in the past. You have to have that memory. It's like Cervantes' Don Quixote, a 1,000-page masterpiece, but it's a very interlayered story. It's actually very similar in a way to 300 Issues of Cerebus, because there are stories within stories within stories in Cervantes' Don Quixote, as there are in Cerebus. But if your reading isn't where it should be, you're not going to get through the first 2 pages of Cervantes in English or in any translation. It's just not going to happen. Unless you have that innate desire, perseverance, curiosity to understand it, to basically retrain your brain and then it's possible.
Yeah.
But poor Cerebus, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 20 years as
Well,
to who's going to be reading this book besides
right.
us.
Well, there's another thing where certain things happen to where they just run their course naturally. Cerebus could have been an experience. Cerebus was that alternative book that, if you were collecting it, everybody else was missing out. There's a lot of reasons other
Yeah.
than just the work people were doing it. Some people were just like 300 issues by one person, the stunt of it all. So they were, I'm doing it. I'm sticking around for 300 issues, even when it's sucking. I'm buying it. Somebody was buying it. But then the other thing is maybe, and it kind of goes with what you're saying. Well, who knows what's going to happen in 20 years? Who's going to read this stuff? Maybe sometimes when things run their course, they need to disappear so they can be rediscovered. Because what hurts Cerebus is the controversy with Dave Sim that was there, and then the people that latched onto it for an activist reading where they wouldn't let it go and they actually made it bigger than what it was. I'm just at that point where I'm a little dismissive from it because I remember when I actually read what he said about the light in the black hole and everything like that. I read this and I'm like, that's it. It had been really blown out of proportion to what it was. That by the time that I read it, I was like, that's it. I would love to have known what I would have thought if I had just read it first before hearing about all the controversies. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I'm too honest sometimes about it. That's why I'm a little dismissive of it. And then, like I said, you have parts of the work after that just are very hard to get through and to read. And
they're tough. Yeah, they are.
Yeah, they're very hard, right? So my whole thing is I think maybe it does need to go away so that the art, and I'll finally get to my point, that the art of what it is stands on its own. It can be judged on that. Will people try to read all of it when they rediscover this? What? This was the first book that somebody did 300 issues all on their own. You know what I'm saying? Something could bring it back. People could get sick of their Kindles and want something in their fingers again. It's definitely going to be a nostalgic or it's going to have to be a little bit of a rebellion. You know what I mean? It's going to have to feel a little, or maybe the fact that it is so controversial makes people feel like they're grabbing something they shouldn't be. Like when I was reading heavy metal, I knew as a kid I shouldn't be reading heavy metal. You know what I mean? But I was like, oh, this is,
maybe just like we focus on maybe something like Jocka's story.
Yeah.
And then just focusing on that. But I still think it's going to be more of an artist, people who are going to be inspired by him or to pursue it, either writers or comic book people are the ones who are going to just basically read through some of the stories of Cerebus. But I think the general reader, it's going to be such a small group as it is kind of like it is now that so that I've said this in the past that Cerebus will be in a writer's book. Oh, you've heard this before. You have novelists who basically only other novelists read because the general public doesn't like it, but other writers get inspired by that. And same with the Sim.
I remember going into, and this was not, it doesn't feel that long ago, but I remember going in trying to find Kurt Vonnegut books. Like I'd seen the same 2 or 3, and I'm like, there's Slaughterhouse, Titans of Siren, Cat's Cradle. Those were the ones I wanted to read. Breakfast of Champions. It just sounded interesting. And I remember going into, it was not, but what was it called back? Barnes and Noble out of town. And I was trying to find it on the shelves, and they let me know they had to keep them in the back because he's a cult. He was considered a cult author, and people would steal their books, so they had to keep them in the back.
I didn't know that it was a cult author.
Well, the reason you don't know that is now that we fast forward here now, and this is what made me think about it. Last year, we went to, Johnson City, Tennessee. We went, maybe it was another Barnes and Noble. I don't know, man. But anyway, no, Walden Books in the 90s.
I know Walden.
Barnes and Noble now. Sorry, excuse me. But they're out on the shelves now. But it's no longer apparently they're safe to be on the shelves. You know what I mean? And I just feel like part of Kurt Vonnegut's book selling was the fact that you had to grab them and people were doing. I mean, I felt like having that was part of the coolness of having it. Now Kurt Vonnegut is just there. You know what I mean? The books are still great. It's the same quality.
Mhm.
I feel like if somebody's going to get into Cerebus again, that's what's going to grab them. But the artwork, the Jocka story and stuff, is what's going to keep them there. Something's going to have to keep them there. You know?
Vonnegut's one of the few writers that, although it's diminishing, that I still see when I see young people, if they read a novelist, it's Vonnegut. He still stays somehow in the bloodstream of people who like to read. He's still in there. Now it's getting smaller though,
Yeah.
but there's still young people who still don't know who he is.
My thing,
Yeah.
yeah, my thing with Vonnegut, and that's what I'm trying to say. Things lead the course, and this does pertain to what we're talking about. Is in a way, Vonnegut has sort of. I still have 2, 3 of the books. The ones I actually read. So, but he kind of ran his course because I started seeing the formula, the subject matter, the deletion of his mother's life on her by her own hand plays into a theme in a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of that in there. There is a book called Venus on a Half Shell by Philip Jose Farmer, where he wrote it as Trout, Kilgore Trout, the author in Kurt Vonnegut's books. Kurt Vonnegut had an author in the books who wrote seedy. He was everything about a writer that I think Vonnegut didn't like. I don't know. But he wrote these little short stories that were put in porn magazines. And to have his complete collection, you'd have to go into like adult stores and go through their backlog and stuff, right? And one of the books was called Venus of a Half Shell. Philip Jose Farmer said, I'm Kilgore Trout. I need to write that. And for years, people thought that it was Kurt Vonnegut. That's why Kurt Vonnegut didn't want him to do it. He ended up out Kurt Vonnegut in that book,
Huh.
Venus in a Half Shell. So that's what I'm trying to get. Once the formula is broken, I think some people it's ran its course. I can see the elements that make a Kurt Vonnegut story, no matter how cool they are. I mean, the man drew a picture of an asshole with 6 lines for entertainment purposes. You know what I'm saying? Luckily for Cerebus, once Dave Sims got so much in there with variety that if you can make it, he doesn't get formulaic if you can say anything. Okay. That was my whole point I was getting at. First, we had the Conan Barry Windsor Smith parody. Then we have the high society, the social classes, the parody, the satire of other comics and things like that. Then we get to the church and state that is just a wild ride with Mick and Keith and Red Sophia and that little dungeon scene around the 90s, the greatest session.
Like the
And then
little
we get that.
hotel.
And then the humor is there. It's a lot more light despite the subject matter.
Yeah.
And then we get to the point of Jocka's story where it's slice of life. We get Melmoth that I don't even know what the hell that is. That pays off 150 issues later. Things like that. But yeah, it's one life that he said that we're not always, the spotlight is not always on us during our life. And that's what he's done with Cerebus. We're not also the same person.
Yeah.
But like I said, he went off the rails a little bit with the religion, the mental issues and stuff like that Gerard carried the book. So that's what I'm trying to tell you. There's enough in there to where it's not formulaic. That's my whole point. Even though I'm getting tired. We've been doing this for a while.
Now, fortunately for me, I don't have any issues with his. I mean, some of the later stories are difficult to read, not because they make me uncomfortable, but they're just like some of them are just heavy in text. They're heavy in text, and but I've just been fascinated by his imagination, even when he's going in areas which you're like, what are you doing here? But I'm still quite enthralled by it because it comes from that same person. And you have all this wonderful back history of his stronger work, like the books that you mentioned, that even though he's going on this bizarre platform, it still works wonderful for me because it comes from his imagination.
Yeah.
And what he's able to do. And basically, he starts very concrete as a storyteller. And by the end, he's almost I say unreadable in an unpleasant way, but maybe you don't understand it. Basically, it's almost not understandable. But it doesn't matter to me. I think it's because these chunks of stories themselves, like you've revisited Jocka's story several times. I've revisited it several times. I'll continue to revisit it probably till the day that I die. It's been with me already for so long, and it's not going anywhere. It's with me constantly, and like the stories that we've discussed here that matter to us.
Yeah, I'll be reading Jocka's story this week. I'm keeping it out. It's one of my top 10.
Yeah, it's one of those top movies, top novels, top comics, and certainly it's in my top maybe top 5. I think I've said that in the past. I think in comics, and but I still contend it's major North American comic that the majority of people have not heard of, even comic book readers. And but sometimes that's the way it is with art. That's just the way it is. So
nice. We have to close this out. I got 6 messages here.
Yeah, so. You better. I'm sure you're in demand. Yeah. So I'm glad we did this.
Hey, thanks for the long haul. I hope this, we can do this again. We got a part 3. If people come around for the part 3, it's more. I just got that much more to go. So
you got more than I do, but I can find some more. That's certainly.
But we can also go on to a new topic. I'm not committed here, So.
No, this is fine with me. Anything you want to do, it's always a pleasure to be here with you. Always.
All right. Well, thank you, Gore. It was a pleasure. Yeah. Thanks for everyone. Thanks for the 2 people that seem to hang with us through the whole thing. That's quite an achievement. Now we have 3. Everybody's coming back. So catch it on the rewind, like, subscribe, thumb it up. Yeah, leave comments, let us know. Oh, here we go. I'm definitely interested in Jocka's story. Yeah, give it a shot. All right, later, guys. Everybody be excellent to each other.
Happy Sunday, everyone.